We begin this manga with our protagonist, once called a hero, but better known as Aiden Alvidio, the Dragon Slayer King. After a long time, he finally managed to defeat the king of the underworld. But something went wrong because, at the moment of defeating him, a curse fell upon him. And worst of all, his own companions knew this would happen. One of his companions tells him that upon killing the king of the underworld, he won't just die, he will become the next king of the underworld, saying that he should be proud to sacrifice himself for humanity. But they seemed to enjoy it, as he didn't even receive an apology after such betrayal. He only received words of pity because those companions he had trusted for so long had hidden the truth to use him as bait. Now, they would take advantage of the fact that he hadn't yet turned into the king of the underworld, and the mage would seal him, thus sealing the king of the underworld at the same time. The protagonist found himself floating in nothingness, trapped in a seal that made him sink infinitely into a void, a place where time didn't exist. And as he fell, he cursed those bastards over and over again, until suddenly he woke up in a bed, surrounded by surprised people. The protagonist doesn't understand what's happening and sees a woman crying, calling him her son. He doesn't understand why she's calling him that, so he gets up and asks who they are, to which the woman tells him that he has been asleep for 2 days straight, and assuming he might be disoriented, she hugs him and says that she is his mother, calling him Aiden Remus. The protagonist is shocked because his last name is Alvidio, not Remus. But at that moment he begins to feel a headache, followed by a flood of memories. He doesn't understand what's happening to him, as he is being bombarded with memories of an unfamiliar person. But then he realizes the truth. He is in a body that doesn't belong to him, realizing that he is now in the year 450 of the imperial calendar, 15 years before his death. He knows that in that void, sealed, he lost his life. But now that he has returned, he plans to take revenge and eliminate them one by one. However, as he looks around, he notices that everyone around him is trembling with fear because it turns out that the real owner of this body was a scoundrel who humiliated people and did whatever he wanted without caring about anyone else. And unfortunately, the protagonist has reincarnated into that boy's body, mentioning that if he weren't the Duke's son, they would have already beaten the real owner of the body to death. Now, we see the protagonist in front of a mirror. He wonders if his past life was just a dream, but then it occurs to him to check if he still has the powers he once had. So he opens the system window, where we see that his name appears broken. Additionally, his titles are still there but are somehow unavailable. That's when another window appears, telling him that once he meets the conditions, they will be unlocked. He realizes that the power he gained from consuming the heart of the Berserker dragon, along with his title of Dragon King, is still intact. So it wasn't a dream. However, on the other hand, he's annoyed that his name is broken. He believes that returning must be a gift from the gods. He mentions that the only thing left to do now is to find his former companions and destroy them. But all of this was witnessed by a servant, who is trembling. The servant brings him something to drink, to which the protagonist thanks him and takes the cup. This shocks the servant, as he doesn't understand why he's being thanked. He believes it must be some kind of evil plan, leaving him completely bewildered. Even when the protagonist comments that he liked the tea, the servant is surprised. But once he leaves the room, he tells his fellow servant, who is equally shocked. The protagonist starts thinking, since he has returned 15 years into the past, he wonders if his original body still exists in this timeline, because at this time, he should be becoming independent from his master Balkan, the former king of mercenaries. So it occurs to him to call one of his servants to gather information. But upon being summoned, the servant panics, to which the protagonist tells him that he only wants to ask a few questions. But from the servant's perspective, he sees the protagonist as some kind of villain. Once alone, the protagonist asks what he knows about the disciple of the king of mercenaries. The servant mentions that this person was quite famous as the disciple of the king of mercenaries, but he also says that there are rumors that the king of mercenaries disappeared some time ago, which confuses the protagonist, because the king of mercenaries had also disappeared. The servant, somewhat perplexed, says he has never heard of a disciple of the king of mercenaries, leaving the protagonist stunned, as he now wonders what happened to his original self. He recalls that, in his past life, he deliberately bumped into a man, managing to steal a bag full of money, but the man discovered him. It turns out that the person he stole from was the king of mercenaries himself. The protagonist, scared, apologized, but the man, seeing his cunning, decided to make him his disciple. That's how he became strong, so that one day he could defeat the berserker dragon and earn the title of Dragon Slayer King. But in this timeline, his original self never became the disciple of the king of mercenaries. Meanwhile, the servants were frightened by the protagonist's unusual behavior since he woke up. However, they assumed that he must have experienced something life-threatening, which explains the change. They also say he seems unmotivated, but in reality the protagonist is just very bored. Because, in this life, his food is served to him. He doesn't have to wash dishes, he even searched for his original self, but it's as if he disappeared. So now he wonders what to do. He doesn't know how to handle his revenge, and the hatred he feels toward his old companions. But at that moment, he sees some knights training. Shortly after, his younger brother arrives. His brother asks why he isn't drinking as usual. The protagonist recalls that, unlike the body's original owner, this brother became a knight. And despite being the second son, he still has the right to inherit. But the worst part for the protagonist is that his younger brother has no respect for him as his elder sibling. The protagonist answers that he was simply bored, to which his brother tells him that training isn't a spectacle. If he wants to stay, he must train. The protagonist realizes that since waking up, he hasn't touched a sword. So he tells his younger brother that he wants to train, which surprises him. Once in the training grounds, the protagonist faces off against a knight who is trying to figure out how to lose without making it look fake, a nearly impossible task. Since the protagonist was supposedly so weak, he couldn't even beat a stray dog. The protagonist warns him not to hold back, stating that if a knight loses to someone as weak as him, it would be disgraceful. If he loses, he'll be fired, with no need to hold back. The fight begins. The protagonist manages to block the first attack, but his hand is trembling, as this body is weaker than he thought. Even so, he continues fighting, exchanging attacks, one after another. His brother is completely shocked, as he had never touched a sword in his life. Yet he seems to have the upper hand over the knight during the training session. The knight wonders why he can't land a single hit on the protagonist, just as the protagonist strikes again. He feels his blood heat up with excitement at the thrill of battle. Meanwhile, everyone watches the fight in astonishment, as the so-called useless guy, who was once weaker than even a dog, now appears to have the advantage over a knight. The protagonist keeps attacking, forcing the knight to step back. He realizes that despite inhabiting a feeble body that has never been trained, he is still the dragon-slaying king who once defeated the berserker dragon. They continue their duel until the protagonist lands a thrust and secures victory. Everyone is left in shock, including his brother, who is utterly astonished. The protagonist, however, remains unfazed and simply walks away, promising to return for training another day, leaving those around him wondering if he is truly the same person. A little while later, we see the protagonist in his room. He realizes how weak his body is, as even a single training match left him wounded. He mutters that with such a mediocre body, he won't stand a chance against any of his old comrades. He notes that they are so powerful that they could easily be considered one-man armies. These individuals are Ilveta, heir of the Grand Duchy of Sides and the King of Knights. Then there's the chosen saint of the Cult of Carnage, the Blood Saint Ron, Espiga, the Archmage Yala, and the second Imperial Prince of the Immortal Empire, the great alchemist Calcis. He knows he stands no chance against any of them, let alone all of them together. Thus he must eliminate them one by one before they can unite, for even in his past life, at his peak, he would have struggled to defeat them. That's why he must eliminate them all within 5 years, before the allied force to subjugate sorcerers is formed. But first, his priority is to restore his broken body. However, he mentions that he has an idea. In a scene transition, we see him handing a shopping list to his servant. The servant looks skeptical about the items the protagonist wants to buy, as they consist of poisonous flowers. Fear creeps over the servant as he asks what the protagonist intends to do with them. To which the protagonist responds that even if he explained, the servant wouldn't understand. Apparently, the original owner of this body had done something similar in the past, so he has no choice but to act accordingly. That's why he leans in and, with a terrifying expression, tells the servant that if he reveals anything, he will have to become his plaything, adding that just imagining it sounds exciting. This makes the servant tremble in fear. Understanding what could happen next, the servant quickly disappears to fulfill the purchase request. Now the protagonist must focus on becoming as strong as possible. A month and a half later, we see him training before he drinks a mana potion. He explains that his method of getting stronger is to push his body to its limits, training until exhaustion, and then replenishing his energy with mana potions. Each potion costs as much as an average person's monthly expenses, but since he is the Duke's son, he can afford them. He asks his servant if he has acquired the items he requested, to which the servant replies that everything is in his room, still trembling as he wonders why his master needs so many poisonous herbs. Once inside his room, the protagonist inspects the herbs to ensure their quality. His plan is to use them to strengthen himself. According to his past life comrades, consuming a poisonous herb causes severe distress to the body, forcing it to utilize all its resources to survive. In the process, one might awaken hidden potential. He knows this experiment could kill him, yet he eats the herb without hesitation and immediately downs the potion. He feels immense pain, but the worst part is that he will have to repeat this procedure at least 100 times. However, he notices that his mana flow has become smoother, confirming that his former comrade's theory was correct. At that exact moment, he hears a very familiar voice, leaving him stunned. He demands that the voice show itself. Just then, his servant enters, having heard a loud noise, but the protagonist orders him to leave. The servant, confused, asks why, to which the protagonist responds with an intimidating tone that he won't repeat himself. Terrified, the servant immediately exits the room. The protagonist recognizes the voice perfectly. It belongs to the king of the underworld. He wonders why he is here. The voice sarcastically replies that he has been caught. The protagonist shouts at him, demanding to know why he is in this place, as he witnessed his demise with his own eyes. The voice responds that no matter how much the protagonist tries to see him, he has no physical body, so it's impossible. Calming down, the protagonist asks how he can still speak if he lost his body. The voice reveals that in his final moments, the protagonist died while he was on the verge of becoming the king of the underworld. This leads the protagonist to believe that he indeed became the king of the underworld. The voice confirms it, but not entirely. He explains that upon dying, he transferred his soul into the protagonist's body. Originally, he had planned to take over his body, but because the protagonist died, he couldn't complete the process. The protagonist deduces that the king of the underworld's soul resides within him, and the voice confirms it. The protagonist wonders how he can destroy the soul of the king of the underworld, and considers infusing his body with holy power. At this, the king of the underworld panics and begs him to wait, insisting that he is different from how he used to be. The protagonist doesn't understand what he means, so the voice explains that his madness and chaos weren't originally his own, but rather the result of his connection with the demon god. That connection was severed when the protagonist was sealed in the void. The protagonist thinks this might be true since he can now hold a conversation with him, whereas before he seemed completely insane. The protagonist asks who this demon god is, and Devil responds that he is the embodiment of accumulated evil, feared even by the gods. Devil also reveals that he was cursed in the past to carry out the demon god's will, leading the protagonist to ask another question. He asks if going back in time 15 years was Devil's doing in an attempt to possess the body he reincarnated into. Devil admits that, in a way, yes. He tried using the protagonist's dragon mana to reverse time, surprising the protagonist, as he had no idea that was even possible. Devil explains that the gods created dragons to be their agents, allowing them to interfere with the world's laws. By using dragon mana, he managed to turn back time. The protagonist asks why he didn't use that power to escape the void, instead of rewinding time. But before Devil can answer, he suddenly says he feels exhausted and goes to sleep. A whole month passes, and while we see the protagonist training, he mentions that since that day, Devil has spoken to him constantly. But strangely, he finds it comforting to talk to someone who remembers his past. He realizes that the method to become stronger is quite effective, but unfortunately, the mannequins are no longer useful for training. However, upon seeing some knights training, he becomes happy, because he has found new mannequins to train with. Devil comments that he is more suited to being a villain than a hero, to which the protagonist tells him to be quiet. He recalls that while training with poisonous herbs, he discovered that the sacred power of the holy potion causes Devil a lot of pain, since he is a source of evil. So he threatens to drink the entire bottle because of what Devil said. In response, Devil, to stop him, admits that the protagonist suits the role of a hero better. the protagonist notices a particular knight training someone who seems very familiar. This knight is scolded by his master for falling behind the others, who calls him by the name Lowen. Lowen promises to try harder. Upon hearing that name, the protagonist remembers him. He used to be known as the Free Knight because he pretended to be a knight when, in reality, he was a mercenary. The protagonist also recalls that he had influenced Lowen's life multiple times. However, he ended up dying in the battle against the dragon. The protagonist approaches Lowen, but Lowen does not greet him with respect. So the protagonist pretends to be angry, prompting Lowen to bow to him. Internally, Lowen wonders why this rogue of a protagonist is in that place. Meanwhile, the protagonist simply enjoys seeing his old acquaintance treat him with respect. Lowen is already tired of being humiliated all the time and plans to resign. However, the protagonist tells him to meet him later at his training grounds. Then, he whispers something into his ear which surprises Lowen, as it is something he had never told anyone. As the protagonist walks away, he thinks to himself that since he owes Lowen a debt, he will give him a gift. That night, the protagonist is waiting for Lowen. When Lowen arrives, he asks how he knows his secret. But then, Lowen starts crying and asks if he can really fix his arm. It turns out that in the past, while they were drinking, Lowen confessed that if he had never lost his arm, he could have lived as a true knight. We then see what the protagonist actually whispered to Lowen. He told him that he knows his right arm is stiff. Lowen wonders how he knew, since he has never told anyone. In fact, he himself does not even know why it is like that. The protagonist then explains that Lowen's arm is stiff due to mana rupture syndrome, which shocks Lowen. Mana rupture syndrome refers to disabilities that occur in the mana channels. Lowen says that this syndrome is supposed to be incurable. The protagonist internally notes that in this era, it is incurable. However, a cure is discovered 10 years in the future. He then tells Lowen that he knows the cure and is willing to treat his arm. However, he warns that nothing is free. He presents Lowen with a contract which surprises him. The contract states that Lowen must train with the protagonist every day and swear to follow any order he is given. To Lowen, this contract seems absurd, almost like a slavery agreement. But with no other option, he decides to accept it, clinging to any hope of fixing his arm. The protagonist is very pleased, stating that as a reward for treating Lowen's arm, he will take an object, though it is not yet clear what that is. Meanwhile, Lowen looks very concerned, as the protagonist seems too happy about the situation. A few days later, in the small city of Matilan, the protagonist takes Lowen somewhere to heal his arm. When they arrive at the location, they walk toward a hut. A sign outside states that it is a pharmacy, not a clinic, and asks people to stop coming. The protagonist recalls that in his past life, Lowen had to visit this place to get treatment for his illness. But when they enter, no one is there. Lowen gets distracted by a strange painting. The protagonist explains that the painting represents the philosopher's stone, an object said to interfere in the domain of the gods and even resurrect the dead. The protagonist believes this might be true, given that he has transcended the divine realms of death and time. At that moment, someone behind a door praises the protagonist for knowing such unusual information. The protagonist claims he has heard it in various places. However, in reality, he learned about the philosopher's stone from two former teammates who betrayed him in his past life. The person behind the door steps forward and mentions that it has been a long time since they had a customer who was truly interested. However, they insist they do not do business. The protagonist then asks Lowen to wait outside for a moment. Lowen steps out of the pharmacy and closes the door. Now alone, the protagonist gets straight to the point. He explains that Lowen has mana rupture syndrome, something of interest to the person, as they are searching for a cure. Calling her beast skin alchemist Cassie, she is visibly surprised, revealing herself to be a demi-human. The protagonist also tells her that, like Lowen, she has mana rupture syndrome. The only thing slowing the progression of her disease is the use of special herbs. This revelation shocks Cassie. The protagonist explains that, unlike Lowen, whose disease is limited to his arm, Cassie's condition is far worse, as it has spread to her organs. Despite her surprise, Cassie says that even if she wanted to, she cannot heal Lowen's arm because she has not yet found a cure. The protagonist pulls out a paper and hands it to her, leaving her in shock at its contents. The paper contains the cure for her disease. The protagonist memorized this information because Calcis, one of the traitors from his past, kept repeating it over and over. However, he does not remember it perfectly. That is why he needs Cassie, someone knowledgeable enough to complete the cure, even with incomplete information. She says she will need a month and a half. The protagonist tells her that even then, she will struggle to obtain the necessary ingredients with her limited resources. Cassie understands that the protagonist wants something in exchange. He tells her he wants her ring. The ring is the Ring of Speed, an artifact that triples physical speed for 10 seconds 3 times a day. It is extremely useful for surprise attacks, escapes, and battles. In his past life, Logan received it as a memento, and even with only one arm, it helped him become an S-rank warrior. It is also Cassie's only means of defense due to her physical limitations. The protagonist tells her that if she comes with him to the Duke's household, he could protect her so she will not need the ring anymore. Cassie warns that people will talk if he takes in a beast skin. The protagonist replies that he does not care what people say about him. After all, the world already sees him as a scoundrel. This moves Cassie, and she accepts his proposal, handing him the ring. Upon returning to the Duke's household, as they are arriving, a green-haired servant rushes over, visibly distressed, looking for the protagonist. He reports an emergency. The protagonist's younger brother has disappeared in the Monster Mountain. Apparently, someone went missing in the mountain, and the protagonist's brother, along with a team, went to rescue them. However, they have not returned in 2 days. The protagonist is deeply shocked. If his brother disappears, he will have to become the heir, ruining his plans for revenge. That is why he must rescue him. Determined, he decides to join the rescue team, instructing his servant to take Cassie to her room before asking Cassie for a favor. A little while later, the protagonist was asking his father for permission to join the search party, to which his father refused, as it was too dangerous. But the protagonist began to fake tears, claiming he missed his brother, and his father was so moved that he embraced him and decided to let him go. This way of doing things seemed somewhat underhanded to Devil, but it worked nonetheless, placing the protagonist under the protection of the vice captain of the Knights, who, despite agreeing to protect him, found it a nuisance. In a scene change, they arrived at the monster-infested mountain, finding traces of a battle. The protagonist noticed a goblin dagger, but something was odd. There was no way a group of goblins could have defeated his brother and his entire team. Moreover, it didn't make sense that the goblins would have erased the tracks, as they didn't possess such advanced intelligence, unless it was a goblin king. These creatures had much greater intelligence than regular goblins, along with vastly superior strength. He informed the vice captain that they might be dealing with a goblin king, to which the vice captain replied that even he would struggle against one, so they should withdraw and come up with a plan. The protagonist disagreed, arguing that if they wasted more time, the goblins would have already eaten their captives. He ordered the vice captain to bring a tracking dog. The vice captain objected, saying it would be useless, as the scent had been completely erased. But the protagonist insisted. Once the dog was brought, the protagonist gave it a potion that greatly enhanced its sense of smell. The dog was then able to pick up a trail. This potion was the favor the protagonist had asked Cassie for before leaving. Now that they had a trail, the protagonist ordered them to move forward. A little while later, they found the goblin village, spotting the protagonist's brother and the knights locked up. They had not arrived too late, but there was a problem. For some reason, there were 3 goblin kings in a single village. The vice captain told the protagonist that while they fought the goblins, he should rescue his brother and the knights and then escape, to which the protagonist agreed. Despite the presence of 3 goblin kings, which was unusual, there were enough knights to handle them without him, and so they attacked the village. The prisoners were overjoyed to see the knights, while the protagonist managed to sneak past until he reached the cage. He broke the lock and freed everyone, including his brother. He ordered all the civilians to flee. Now that he had rescued his brother, he planned to sneak away. His brother ran after him, shouting that there was a monster, but before he could finish, he screamed in terror, telling him to run. The protagonist didn't understand, as a gigantic monster loomed behind him, attacking without warning, but the protagonist reacted in time to dodge it. He realized he should have expected this. If there were 3 goblin leaders in one village, it could only mean one thing. A monster ranked higher than a goblin king was present. The worst kind of demon in human shape, a troll. The protagonist ordered his brother to take the villagers and flee with them. His brother warned him that if he fought the troll, he would die. But the protagonist, acting cool, declared that he wouldn't die, before launching himself at the troll, managing to dodge its strike and cutting its leg. However, as expected, The troll's regeneration speed was extremely high, so he couldn't win with normal attacks. That's why he pulled something out of his pocket. Meanwhile, the knights were stunned to see the troll. The vice captain never expected a troll to be in the village. As he ran toward the protagonist, he prayed that he could hold on a little longer. The protagonist continued fighting the goblin. He pulled out the ring of speed, which, when worn, would grant him increased speed for 10 seconds. As the countdown began, the protagonist moved at incredible speed, dodging the troll's attacks. He noted that in this life, he had not yet reached this level of speed, but thanks to the ring, he could achieve it. While dodging and slashing the troll from all directions, the time kept ticking away. With only a second left, he realized that the next stage he needed to reach was the sword aura stage. His sword began to glow with mana, and in one swift strike, he severed the troll's head, finishing it off in just 10 seconds. Meanwhile, the vice captain ordered everyone to assist the protagonist immediately, but at that moment, he saw the protagonist mid-air in a majestic stance. He noticed the glow of his sword, realizing that the protagonist had reached the sword aura stage, shocking him as even he had never mastered it. However, the protagonist was completely drained, landing on a tree. He muttered that his whole body hurt just from using the sword aura for 10 seconds, meaning he had to use the ring of speed more carefully. The next day, the Duke was informed of everything that had happened. He even asked the vice captain if the protagonist had truly defeated the troll and used the sword aura technique, which the vice captain confirmed. Meanwhile, we see the troll's body lying outside the mansion, and the Duke wondered what was happening to his son, as he never imagined he possessed such qualities. That same night, we see the protagonist meditating. He noticed that his magical capacity had increased, but he also realized that he was still weak. With his current strength, he would never be able to take down those who had pressured him. At that moment, he saw a small creature commenting that it liked the protagonist's determination. He was surprised to see it and asked who it was, but then he recognized its voice. The creature confirmed that it was indeed the Lord of the Underworld, the Underlord. But the protagonist decided to keep calling it Devil for simplicity. Instead of being shocked, the protagonist started laughing. The adorable form that Devil had taken made him burst into laughter, which infuriated Devil, who blamed it all on the protagonist's weakness. The protagonist asked how he could see Devil now, to which Devil responded that only he could see it, as apparently, the stronger the protagonist became, the more visible Devil became to him. The protagonist said he didn't like the idea of seeing Devil all the time, but then he started thinking. According to Devil's words, Underlord was a curse passed down by the demon god, and Devil freed himself from that curse by severing his bond with the demon god. For that reason, the protagonist asked for Devil's real name. Devil admitted that he had lost his name long ago. Upon hearing this, the protagonist decided to give him a name, choosing Curse. Since, in the protagonist's logic, as he was a curse placed upon him, his name should be Curse. Devil found it somewhat foolish, to which the protagonist sarcastically told him to be quiet. Devil smiled and told him to call him whatever he wanted. However, even though Devil was now named Curse, the protagonist decided to keep calling him Devil because he thought it suited him better. A week later, the protagonist visited Cassie's room, where she was still researching a cure for mana rupture. She welcomed him, calling him Troll Master. Ever since he defeated the troll, he had earned the nickname Troll Master, but he didn't like it as he felt they were implying he had a troll's face. He asked about Lowen, to which Cassie replied that he was at the back of the room, so the protagonist went to see him. Upon finding him, Lowen was crying with joy. His right arm was completely healed, and he swore lifelong loyalty to the protagonist. The protagonist was moved and fully accepted his loyalty. The protagonist then asked Cassie if she had been able to cure her own illness as she had with Lowen. Cassie explained that her mana rupture was very different from Lowen's, so she still needed another month of research before she could be cured. The protagonist told her she was doing a great job, and she thanked him, calling him Troll Master again. This made Lowen laugh at the nickname, which infuriated the protagonist. He told Lowen to follow him because they had work to do. Lowen eagerly said he would do any task, but he shouldn't have said that, because moments later, we see that the first task the protagonist assigned him was hard physical labor. Now we see the protagonist with a merchant. He wanted to use the money from selling the troll to buy some plants. When he showed the merchant the list of plants, the merchant was surprised. They were poisonous plants. The protagonist asked intimidatingly if it would be possible to buy them. The merchant, not wanting any trouble, agreed to sell them. A few moments later, Felina, a servant, informed the protagonist that his father was calling for him. So he went to see his father. When he arrived at his office, he was surprised to see someone who brought back unpleasant memories. Devil asked who he was, and the protagonist said he was just an old man who despised mercenaries. The protagonist greeted him, calling him the protector of the northeast border. The man was surprised that the protagonist knew who he was, to which the protagonist responded that he did, as he was one of the few in the Empire who had reached the level of Swordmaster. The Swordmaster stage was a transcendental level that all knights dreamed of achieving. Those who surpassed the realm of talent entered the realm of superhumanity. They could split mountains with their swords, and their breath alone could shake the air. The protagonist was one of the few who had reached this stage before, and it was the level he needed to reach again. The protagonist's father told the man that monsters had been acting strangely. The man replied that it wasn't just in the city but in other areas as well, including the Tower of Slaughter. The protagonist remembered that place. It was where one of his old comrades who had betrayed him was. The man told the protagonist he wanted him to join his order, promising to make him the greatest swordsman in the Empire. The protagonist refused, since he had already undergone that training in his previous life. He knew exactly how to reach the level of Swordmaster on his own. He stated that he knew how to become stronger, even in his current state. If they fought, he would be able to scratch him. Upon hearing that, the man made the air tremble, causing the protagonist to feel the pressure around him. The man asked if he still believed he could land a scratch on him. The protagonist did not back down, insisting that he could. He made a bet. If he failed to scratch him, he would join his order. But if he succeeded, the man would have to give him his sword. The man was shocked by the wager, but realized that the protagonist was indeed strong. The protagonist's father couldn't withstand the pressure and passed out. The man accepted the bet, surprised that the protagonist wanted his family heirloom sword. Devil realized that the protagonist had been after the sword from the beginning. The protagonist said he must obtain a sword like that when the opportunity arises. That sword was Beelzebub, one of the legendary swords. Now we see them outside in a training area. The big guy plans to use his sword, Beelzebub. But this duel will have two conditions. Neither of them will use an aura sword, and the big guy will not move his right leg. The protagonist mentions that, although it may seem like a disadvantage, for a master swordsman, it is nothing. Additionally, they have quite an audience. He must think carefully about every move, as one wrong step could mean being knocked out. And so, the protagonist charges at the big guy, but he easily blocks the attack. The protagonist, after stepping back, continues attacking. The big guy remarks that this unrefined swordplay resembles that of a group of mercenaries. He says that when the protagonist joins his order, they will have to fix that. The protagonist gets angry at his comment. He charges again, this time using a technique of the king of mercenaries. The big guy looks very confident, but the protagonist ignores his block, moves past his sword, and nearly manages to cut him. Everyone is shocked by the protagonist's move, and his father wonders if the protagonist is really cornering the big guy. But back in the fight, the protagonist keeps attacking in that unusual way, and the big guy realizes that the protagonist is aiming at vital points, saying that he definitely needs to bring the protagonist into his order. So he launches an attack, but the protagonist barely manages to dodge it, then steps back to gain some distance. The big guy tells him that he won't be able to land a hit with those movements, and welcomes him in advance to his order, to which the protagonist also thanks him in advance, and at that moment, he positions himself and suddenly vanishes. The big guy is shocked. All this time, the protagonist had been hiding his true strength, managing to cut him at great speed before finishing his sentence, thanking him for his sword. Once the battle ends, the entire audience erupts in joy, but the protagonist had only achieved that speed, thanks to the Ring of Swiftness. Though no one knows, the protagonist thought he would cut off the big guy's arm with that attack, but it only left a scratch. As promised, the big guy hands over his sword, and the protagonist accepts it, though he can't hide his happiness over such a grand prize. However, to Devil, that reward was obtained by cheating. That night, the protagonist was admiring the sword. Devil laughs, saying he doesn't know how to use it properly. This confuses the protagonist, to which Devil replies that he knows the secret of legendary swords that humans are unaware of. The protagonist is shocked and asks what the secret is. Devil tells him it won't be free. He will reveal it under 2 conditions. First, the protagonist must swear loyalty to him as king. Second, he must never make him drink the sacred potion. But instead, the protagonist pours a bit of his blood onto the sword, making it glow. He had just made a blood pact with the sword. The protagonist tells him that he actually already knows everything about legendary swords. Beelzebub is one of the 72 swords which, despite appearing simple and robust, were actually forged from the bodies of the corrupt lords who once ruled the ancient underworld. Each sword holds the power of a corrupt lord, and one of the 3 conditions to awaken its hidden power is to feed it blood and form a blood contract. Devil is extremely frustrated that the protagonist already knew all of this and didn't fall for his scheme. So, in retaliation for trying to control him, the protagonist tells Devil to prepare for drinking a sacred potion every day. Devil desperately tries to apologize in every way possible. The next day, the protagonist is in his father's office, asking for permission to join the big guy's search party to the Demon Mountain. His father is hesitant, as it's a very dangerous place. The big guy helps by saying that he will protect him, which reassures his father. However, he still hesitates to let him go, since the protagonist's true goal is to fulfill the second condition to awaken the sword's power, which is to absorb large amounts of life force. He plans to eliminate the monsters there and absorb their energy. Meanwhile, we see the monsters of the Demon Mountain running in a particular direction. In a scene transition, we see the protagonist and the big guy arriving at Attila's fortress, which was built to defend against the demonic beasts of the Pyran Mountains. However, upon entering, they realize that the facilities and the soldiers are a complete mess. They are greeted by Dazval, the chief officer of the fortress. The soldiers whisper about the protagonist's nickname, and some don't believe he actually defeated a troll, thinking instead that his title of Troll Master comes from resembling one. These comments anger Low-End, but the protagonist says he has heard them so many times that they no longer bother him. The big guy then tells the fortress chief that there are too many noisy insects, referring to the soldiers talking about the protagonist. This intimidates the chief commander in front of the big guy. A few moments later, the protagonist asks the fortress chief if they have had any monster attacks. The chief replies that there is no need to worry about that. But the big guy doesn't believe that they shouldn't be concerned. After all, they are stationed near a monster-infested forest. The chief then explains that the Orcus have settled in the center of the mountain range, and he believes that's why the monsters haven't attacked. The protagonist finds this strange. Devil mentions that something big is coming. The protagonist, full of curiosity, looks towards the horizon and is completely shocked by what he sees. He warns the fortress chief to close the gates because monsters are approaching. But the chief thinks he's joking until the big guy tells him to close the gates. When they finally look at the horizon, they see a wave of monsters rapidly approaching. The soldiers panic, asking for instructions from the wall's commander, but he is unable to make any decision. For this reason, the large man orders the doors to be closed, to which the soldiers obey the orders and close the doors. But just before closing them completely, a huge wolf manages to get through the wall. It almost manages to kill one of the guards, but the protagonist arrives in time and easily kills the wolf. Realizing that although almost imperceptible, the Cebu's sword absorbs vital energy, the knight he saved is surprised because the protagonist used the sword's aura. They begin to believe that he truly is the Trollmaster. But that nickname continues to anger the protagonist. The soldier then properly thanks him for saving him, to which the protagonist, somewhat angry, tells him to take a sword and protect the wall. At that moment, the wolf appears unconcerned with the protagonist, realizing the large number of monsters at the wall's gates. Although the protagonist is very excited, as he will be able to feast on the vitality of all those monsters. But then he notices the strange way he speaks, to which Devil says the Beelzebub's sword is gluttonous, which highlights the gluttonous feelings of its wielder. This embarrasses the protagonist a little, but he doesn't mind, because after all, he came to the wall to awaken Beelzebub's power by absorbing the vitality of the monsters. Then, the large man tells the protagonist to wait as he will clear the entrance, to which the protagonist yells at him to let him handle everything, but the large man ignores him and jumps towards the monsters, which ruins the protagonist's original plans a little. But the large man, very excited, launches a powerful attack against all the monsters. The protagonist begs him to leave at least a quarter of the monsters for him. In a change of scene, we see all the monsters defeated. The large man has taken care of all of them, leaving the protagonist quite sad. The wall's commander thanks them for their help, and Devil begins to speak to the protagonist, which he thinks is for mocking him. But Devil tells him that when he said something enormous was approaching, he wasn't referring to the wave of monsters. This leaves the protagonist confused. And at that moment, a large fireball appears, heading toward the wall. The fireball impacts the wall. The large man wonders if it is an attack from a mage. The protagonist tells him no, as he knows perfectly well who is attacking them. He remembers it was the one who almost killed him in his past life. And it is then that we see a line of orcs and trolls. The soldiers are shocked by what they see, as is the wall's commander, wondering why they are all together. The large man takes a step forward to launch an attack, but the protagonist tells him to wait as he won't be able to do it alone. To which the large man doesn't understand, and the protagonist tells him to look behind all the monsters, where we see a monster with a staff. The protagonist explains that this monster possesses mana and the power of a sword master known as the superior troll. The large man tells everyone to evacuate, as even for him it will be difficult. The protagonist tells him that there is still a way to defeat it, which he doesn't understand, and the protagonist asks Logan to lead the soldiers and keep the monsters occupied as best he can. Logan accepts the order and charges into battle. Meanwhile, the protagonist tells him that there is only one way for everyone to survive, so he begins to explain his plan. As we see the knights fighting against the monsters, the large man and the wall's commander are surprised by the protagonist's plan. The wall's commander thinks the plan is crazy, as one of the phases involves the large man stepping back. But the protagonist remains firm in his plan, which also seems crazy to the large man. But the protagonist asks him to trust him. To which, after recalling the trust the protagonist has shown, he agrees to the protagonist's plan, and before leaving, he tells him that if his plan fails, he will have to join his order. To which the protagonist agrees, and the large man jumps toward the forest. Devil asks the protagonist how he knows that this superior troll is the same one from his past life, to which the protagonist says that despite the troll's bad relationship with the Asorcos, they are working together, while we see Lowen defeat a troll using the sword's aura. This surprises the protagonist, as apparently training with poisonous flowers also worked for Lowen. But he mentions that the reason the monsters led by a superior troll are called an immortal army is because the troll can revive them using its power. As we see the troll Lowen defeated revive using magic from the superior troll. Normally, it takes the magic of an archmage, or the aura of a sword master to defeat them. But the protagonist has a better idea. We see him kiss his sword, saying he will feed it trolls. Lowen is already very tired. He thought he had become much stronger by eating the poisonous flowers, but he was wrong, and now he will pay the price. But before the troll can reach him, the protagonist positions himself on the troll's head. Logan tries to explain that even if he attacks, he won't defeat it. To which the protagonist drives his sword into the troll's head and orders Beelzebub to eat it. It begins to absorb the entire existence of the troll, making it completely useless, with no chance of reviving. The superior troll is surprised, and after absorbing the troll's vitality, the protagonist looks at the orcs as his next meal. In a change of scene, the protagonist has already eaten 4 trolls, but he is still hungry for more. While watching the scared trolls and the angry superior troll, he then creates a fire attack. The protagonist begins to dodge it. Devil asks him why he doesn't just attack it, to which the protagonist replies that if he touches the fire, even for a moment, he'll be roasted. So the best thing for now is to run and wait for the large man. Apparently he asked for a favor, but he got distracted and almost got hit by an orc. He easily managed to dodge it. Devil asks him why he doesn't devour the orcs, since, although they don't have as much vitality as the trolls, they still have good vitality. The protagonist tells him that it will be advantageous for them not to finish off the orcs as long as the large man arrives on time. But while talking, he got distracted and almost got hit by a fireball, which he managed to jump and dodge. But the superior troll prepares another attack, and Devil asks the protagonist how he plans to dodge the next attack in mid-air. This worries the protagonist, who can only watch as the fireball approaches. But by luck, the large man arrives and saves him by destroying the fireball with his sword, surprising the protagonist, but he quickly remembers that he is falling. And since he has already used a lot of power, he won't be able to stop the fall. But an extremely angry orc saves him, surprising the soldiers. This is the leader of the orc tribe. The reason the orcs were working with the trolls was because of their loyalty to their leader Orko, who was imprisoned with other tribes. But now that the leader of the tribe is here, the orcs will return to their rivalry. That's why he didn't finish off the orcs. The large man attacks the superior troll, which easily blocks it. The large man realizes that the protagonist's words were true when he said he couldn't defeat it alone. But he is not alone, as the orc tribe leader is also fighting alongside him, who is also at the level of a sword master. The large man plans to deliver the final blow, but the superior troll refuses to die, saying he wants to avenge the death of his parents, beginning to accumulate a lot of power. The large man realizes that something is happening with the superior troll, to which the troll says that he doesn't plan to die in vain and will explode with all of them. The large man knows he can't handle this. He orders everyone to run, but the protagonist charges at the troll with a look of desire, as this is his opportunity to absorb the superior troll's vitality and awaken the power of the sword. In another scene, we see that the troll ended up exploding. A few seconds earlier, the protagonist managed to bury the sword, beginning to absorb the mana, but the troll's energy is much greater than he expected, and Beelzebub is unable to absorb it all. He has already reached his limit, so it's time to go to the final phase to awaken his power. He asks Devil for help, as the final condition is to fuse it with demonic energy to awaken the corrupted monarch lying dormant. To which Devil tells him that in exchange, he must stop taking sacred potions for a week, to which he agrees, and Devil touches the sword, beginning to merge it with demonic energy. This caused Beelzebub to awaken, who, very angry, asks who dared to wake him up. The protagonist notices that Beelzebub is really intimidating, but luckily, he has something that scares him greatly. That something is Devil, who makes his presence known before Beelzebub, making him sweat in fear. Devil orders him to give up his authority, to which he, after the shock of encountering the king of the underworld, decides to accept and hand over his authority. Beelzebub's fear is due to the fact that Devil managed to defeat all the corrupted monarchs and became the ruler of the underworld. That's why he's afraid. Through all this, Devil was simply waiting for the protagonist to fulfill his promise. And so, the protagonist orders Beelzebub to devour all vitality of the superior troll, to which, obeying the orders, he devoured it, until, suddenly, the superior troll disappeared. Logan wonders what happened to the superior troll. Meanwhile, on the other hand, the protagonist realizes the true power of gluttony. But after absorbing so much mana and vitality, he feels like vomiting, to which Devil explains that when you exceed the limit your body can handle, it becomes poison. But the protagonist is determined to absorb that energy, but when he lowers his gaze, he sees a phoenix egg. And now he understands why the superior troll was capable of using fire magic, because he ate the phoenix egg, to which he now also decides to eat the egg to use fire magic. But at that moment, the big guy arrives and slaps him on the back, causing him to end up vomiting the extra energy and vitality onto the egg. He now regrets losing that energy, and the big guy is surprised to see the phoenix egg, as they are as rare as dragons. But just then the egg begins to crack, and from it rises a very bright phoenix. It managed to awaken thanks to the mana expelled by the protagonist. Everyone is surprised to see the phoenix, to which it perches on the protagonist's head, causing him to be covered in flames. But for some reason, these don't burn, and Devil explains that the phoenix gave him its blessing, which makes the protagonist more resistant to all types of fire. He believes the phoenix did this because it sees him as its savior, since it awoke using the mana expelled by the protagonist. Through all this, the protagonist knows that the phoenix's blessing will help him against the sorceress from his past life. The phoenix takes flight, but before it drops a feather into the palm of the protagonist. Meanwhile, the big guy was left shocked by what just happened. A big cow, the chief of the Orcus, appears, saying that he broke the oath, and to pay for it, he wants them to end his life, to which the protagonist doesn't understand what he means. It turns out that in the past, the chief of the Orcus, in a battle against the leader of the protagonist's family at that time, lost to the family leader, so he swore that he would never again come down from the mountain range, and since an oath is more important than their lives, he was determined to die. But the protagonist, now understanding, simply tells him that he doesn't care about that oath and turns around, which angers the Orcus. Seeing this, the protagonist asks him if he doesn't want to pay in another way, which leaves the Orcus confused. The next day, the big guy is surprised by what he sees. The Orcus were working with the humans to clean the remnants of the battle, which would normally take months, but thanks to the help of the Orcus, they will be able to do it in a week, They are doing the work as payment for their chief's oath. This surprised the big guy, as the protagonist continues to amaze him. And since everything was now resolved, he decides to leave everything in the hands of the Tower of Butchery. To which the protagonist agrees. After all, he only came to awaken Beelzebub, but in addition to that, he gained the Phoenix's blessing. So the only thing left for him now is to train even harder. On the other hand, when he returns to the city, the whole village cheers him as a hero, as the rumor spread that the protagonist defeated the superior troll and is capable of taming phoenixes, which embarrasses the protagonist, but upon seeing that everyone treats him like a hero, he begins to find it somewhat pleasant, although now his priority is to train. A little while later, the protagonist was with the redhead. She tells him that her syndrome is much more severe than Lovin's, so she won't be able to cure it, which apparently saddens the protagonist, who asks if there's another way, to which she tells him that she needs a high-level alchemist, capable of creating an elixir of the highest quality, and she believes it will be impossible. To which the protagonist tells her not to worry, as he knows an extremely good alchemist. At that moment, she regains hope, commenting that when she discovered she wouldn't be cured, she broke down, as she wouldn't have much time left, and just decided to accept it. But beneath the protagonist's cold words, there are very warm actions, so now, recovering hope, she asks him to bring that alchemist. Once she leaves, Devil is surprised that the protagonist cares about someone, to which he simply tells him that he is fulfilling a promise. Either way, he had to visit that alchemist, mentioning that the person also doesn't have much time left. 3 days later, we see the protagonist in Magellan City, in the largest trade center of the empire. But, on the other hand, in the lower districts, we see this blonde man being intimidated by these who pray, as he can only make at most one high-quality prison a week, and these men want him to make double, to which he tells them that it's impossible. But they don't care. At that moment, the protagonist arrives as someone who solves others' problems. He now stands before the huge man, to which the protagonist ignores him and asks the blonde if he is being intimidated. But the big guy gets angry for being ignored and attacks the protagonist, but in a flash, the protagonist sends him crashing into the wall with a punch, surprising the other men. Seeing this, one of the bearded men attacks the protagonist very angrily, but he dodges and lowers his pants, revealing some bear-themed underwear, to which the protagonist mocks, and the man, very angry, attacks him with his sword. But the protagonist uses the sword aura and breaks his sword, surprising the bearded man, who is even more stunned when he sees that can the prota use the sword's aura. But in a scene change, we see the man all beaten up on the ground, while his companion C is surprised that someone like the prota is in the slums, to which the prota approaches the blonde man and asks him if he needs his help. Additionally, he won't charge much. The man doesn't know what to do. But seeing the situation, he has no choice but to accept the prota's help. The blonde man, upon accepting the prota's help, begins to cry and asks him for a favor. And here the prota tells us that this man used to be a very renowned alchemist. But after his daughter was kidnapped, he was forced to supply elixir pills to prevent harm from coming to his daughter. But then, after discovering that his daughter lost her life, he asked for vengeance and soon joined his daughter. Of course, this happened in his past life, and it's still not too late to change it. So the blonde man asks him to save his daughter, to which the prota agrees, but asks him not to forget his promise to do whatever he asks of him. So he looks at the man he left unharmed and approaches him, since he has some questions to ask. But knowing he won't answer easily, he begins to beat him. But the man yells that he will answer all the questions. On the other hand, in the office of the Cerberus guild leader, those who kidnapped the alchemist's daughter, at that moment someone arrives at the office. It was the man the prota left, but he was beaten up, and the prota is behind him. The prota begins to approach the guild leader, to which the leader releases a mana device as an alarm, but for some reason none of his men appeared, to which the prota tells him he left them in the deep sleep, and asks him where the alchemist's daughter is, to which the leader now understands why the prota came. He tells him not to underestimate him, since he is the strongest in his guild. Thus, attacking the man in a scene change, we see him all beaten up opening the alchemist's daughter's cell. He mentions that the girl is very aggressive, and at that moment when he opens the bars, the alchemist's daughter attacks the guild leader without thinking. He is thrown away. The girl intends to finish off anyone. Devil finds the girl interesting, which intrigues the Prota. Devil says the girl has the power of a very annoying type, but that doesn't matter to the Prota. His priority is just to rescue her. While the girl hits the Prota, she screams for him to take her to her father. To which the Prota tells her it's fine and that he will take her to her father, which leaves her confused. To which the Prota tells her that her father sent him to save her. She, still not believing it, hugs him and starts crying. Through all this, the Prota hugs her and reassures her. Devil watches them from above, mentioning that the Prota has become too soft. The Prota gets upset, since Devil sees him as an insensitive monster. And so, the girl returned to her father, and a while later, while she slept, the father thanks him for recovering his daughter, to which the Prota says that the most important thing is still missing, the payment for saving his daughter. The Prota asks how much his daughter is worth to him, to which the man responds that his daughter is worth more than his own life, even he would give anything for her. To which the Prota says that as payment, he wants something like high-quality pills and elixirs, to which the alchemist now understands what the Prota is really looking for, and gives him a pill of the highest quality he has been able to create, to which the Prota takes it and eats it, and upon doing so, he notices that his mana has doubled. The alchemist tells him that as payment, he will create more of these pills for him, to which the Prota says that instead of paying him with pills, he should move to the Duke's house. This way he will be able to protect him and his daughter, which surprises the alchemist, who asks who the Prota is, to which he introduces himself as the Duke's eldest son, leaving the alchemist surprised. The Prota explains that there is a matter he needs him for, and that if he helps him, he will protect his family for life, to which the alchemist begins to think and asks what he must help with, to which, in a scene change, in the Redhead's laboratory, the alchemist is examining the Redhead syndrome and is surprised to see such a severe case. He believes that it is possible to find medicine based on the Redhead's writings, but there was a problem. The mana rupture syndrome is related to frozen mana veins, and the only way to create a cure is with very powerful fire magic. To which the Redhead mentions that it can only be obtained from the heart of a fire dragon and the feathers of a phoenix, so it's impossible to find any of these creatures. But the Prota, remembering the feather that the phoenix left him, shows it to them, leaving them completely shocked, asking how he obtained it. To which the Prota says that it was dropped by a phoenix. The alchemist examines the feather and mentions that if the feather is real, it will only take 2 days. The Prota is almost watching happily. Even a tear falls from his face out of happiness. But just at that moment, the green-haired servant arrives to inform the Prota that his father wants to see him, to which the Prota remembers that he didn't tell his father he had left. So once in the Duke's office, he learned of the Prota's trip, to which the Prota apologizes for not informing him, to which the Duke tells him that he doesn't plan to give him a gift. Also, he didn't even call him for that, which leaves the Prota confused, to which the Duke tells him that he received an invitation to the royal banquet that the Prota must attend to celebrate the Crown Prince's birthday, to which the Watts asks why his younger brother doesn't go. To which the Duke replies that he had to decline the offer as he has matters with the knights. To which the Prota mentions that he also has things to do, but then remembers something that makes him change his mind, agreeing to go to the banquet with pleasure. Once he leaves the office, Devil asks the Prota why he changed his mind so suddenly, to which he says that in the year 450 of the calendar, the Dark Mages attacked the Imperial Banquet, in which the Dark Mage Queen, the Silver Witch, also participated, and he must try to win her over. To which Devil is surprised, as according to him, the Prota hates Dark Mages, to which the Prota explains that unlike the Dark Mage group called Chaos, she is the leader of a moderate faction called Fire of Florence, mentioning that he was the one who finished her off in his past life. But this time, it could be different, as recalling the events of the Prota's past life, he had already defeated her. To which the Silver Witch tells him that if they had met under different circumstances, they would have been good friends, also that she regrets not being able to redirect the contaminated art of dark magic and restore the will of Florence. The next day, the Prota was already on his way to the Imperial Palace. The Prota is annoyed to receive so many escorts for this trip, to which Lovin tells him that the number of escorts represents the Duke's power, so it is important to show superiority. But putting that aside, he asks why they are taking a different route, to which the Prota replies that it's just to have a more peaceful journey. But the real reason is for the high-quality elixirs. As it turns out, The alchemist told him that to create the highest quality elixirs, he needs hen tears, which come from tree spirits, but unfortunately, they are on the brink of extinction, so it's very hard to find one of those spirits. But the prota mentions that although he has no information about that spirit, he knows someone who will definitely know. The prota tells Owen he needs to do something in the mountains, to which he wants to escort him, but the prota tells him no, since he is weaker than him. And so, the prota ventured into the mountains until he reached a heart-shaped rock. He tells Devil that the king of mercenaries gave it to him, to which Devil doesn't understand why the king of mercenaries would give the prota a heart-shaped rock. To which the prota cuts the rock and reveals a hidden dungeon, mentioning that the real gift is inside it. The prota, as he enters, mentions that this is not a normal dungeon, and that the first time he entered without knowing it, he almost lost his life. But in this life, he couldn't be more grateful to know about this dungeon. As we see inside, there is a kind of wizard surrounded by dozens of monsters. Devil recognizes the wizard. He mentions that it's a lich, a dark wizard who turned himself into an undead. The prota mentions that if you don't know how to beat him, it's very difficult. But thanks to his past life, he knows exactly how to defeat him. To which the wizard threatens to turn him into an undead. But the prota moves at incredible speed, heading directly for the wizard. The wizard is surprised. To which the prota says that the way to defeat him is to take him down first, since if you defeat the wizard, all his summons will disappear. Right. And so it was, once the prota defeated the wizard with a slash, his summons began to disintegrate. The wizard dropped a pendant, which it became very familiar to the prota. But not to remind us, he still kept it. Now we see them walking further down the dungeon, until they reach a sort of altar where there was a golden shield. To which the prota asks Devil about it, and he remembers it, to which Devil says he could never forget it. After all, it was because of that shield that he lost in his battle against the prota, the spiritual shield of Banquet, the gift from the king of mercenaries he gave to the prota in his past life. The prota explains that this shield is an item imbued with the corrupted spirit of Banquet, which also corrupts its bearer, making it difficult to control in his past life. But he mentions that now he will have no problem. Meanwhile, we see him touch it, and it begins to focus on the prota's wrist. To which he mentions that he likes this shield because he can wear it like a bracelet and make it appear whenever needed. And so, we see the shield transform into a bracelet. After that, the prota calls someone, saying that he knows they are watching him and asks them to come out. At that moment, a creature appears from a portal. A talking rabbit appears, mentioning that it is a spiritual merchant from the spiritual empire. It says that anything the prota needs, it has. Here we are explained what a spiritual merchant is. These are spirits of commerce with strong monetary desires. The spiritual empire was created when these spiritual merchants gathered, with the spirit of the hat being the central figure. The prota mentions that when someone clears a dungeon, the empire sends a spirit merchant to trade the dungeon's products. Specifically, this rabbit thought that the prota wanted to trade the shield, but the prota tells him that's not the case, which surprises the rabbit, to which the prota says he wants to buy information about the locations of the spirits across the continent. The rabbit now understands and says that this information is very expensive, and it will cost at least 2,000 gold coins, to which the prota says he will give 4,000 gold coins for that information, which excites the rabbit. Devil asks the prota why he will pay more than what the rabbit asked, to which the prota says he is using the technique taught by the king of the mercenaries, the technique of squeezing the spiritual merchants. The prota then asks for the locations of the spirits in T4, 1,000 gold coins in exchange for 4,000 gold coins, to which the rabbit isn't stupid and refuses, and the prota tells him that he's just making a proposition and would also like to sell him what's behind him, which makes the rabbit a little angry. To which the prota threatens to destroy him if he doesn't want to cooperate. In the past, the king of the mercenaries taught the prota that the dungeon's core is useless, so no one takes them. But spiritual merchants come to the dungeon just for the core, which for some reason, they always take, although no one knows what they want with it. Meanwhile, the prota was selling the core in exchange for 4,000 coins plus the information, to which the rabbit doesn't know that Jabber Easy spends money on the dungeon core and will be scolded by his superiors. If he doesn't take it, he will be expelled by the merchant of the hat. Meanwhile, the prota, not hearing an answer, plans to destroy the core. But the spirit asks him to wait as he will buy it. And in a change of scenes, we see the rabbit really buying the core. So the prota leaves. But as he is leaving, the rabbit, very angry, mentions that, for scamming him, he hopes he visits the tribe of the Ents, since no human has gone there and returned. On the other hand, Levin starts searching for the prota since it's been half a day since he left. But he arrives just in time. But seeing Levin so worried, the prota starts missing Levin from his past life. He never treated him so kindly. But setting aside small talk, he orders the journey to continue to the imperial capital. On the other hand, at night, we see this girl who seems to be the Silver Witch. She arrived at the dungeon the prota cleared, and apparently, she came in search of that pendant the prota kept. But clearly, she couldn't find it. The next day, they arrive at the imperial capital, being welcomed by this butler, who was expecting the prota's brother in his place, but despite the displeasure, he takes him to his room. Once settled, the prota mentions that the dark mages will attack tonight, and Devil asks if he will warn about the threat, to which the prota says no, to which Devil asks if he doesn't care if people lose their lives, but the prota mentions that he does care. After all, his past life was the hero who saved the world. But he already has plans for tonight, and so, the night arrived and the banquet was taking place. But when the prota arrives at the celebration, everyone begins to speak ill of the prota, but he was already used to it after all. In his past life, they treated him that way too. Anyway, the prota only came to see 3 people, and we quickly see this man enjoying the alcohol of the imperial capital when the prota approaches him, for he is Gustav, the head mage of Anjus, the magic tower. The prota tries to make small talk, to which the mage tells him that if he's trying to get on the good side of the magic tower, he shouldn't waste his time. He doesn't get along with his superiors. To which the prota responds by saying he's read his book on the possibilities of magical engineering, finding it somewhat interesting. This makes the mage's eyes shine when hearing that the prota read his book, because according to the tower superiors, that book is just garbage, although the prota never actually read it. Every time he tried, he couldn't get past the first page and would fall asleep from boredom. The mage, excited, begins to talk to the prota about magical engineering, but so much information makes the prota have his ears bleed. Even Devil wants him to shut up. He also asks the prota why he needs someone like him, to which the prota says that in the present magical engineering is useless, but in the near future it will become indispensable. For that reason, this mage became very famous, until one day, due to an unprecedented accident in history, he earned the nickname the Crazy Terrorist of the Magic Tower. Because of that, his mana was sealed, and he was expelled. And sometime later he returned to attack the magic tower with engineering weapons he developed himself, and he is insistent that it will probably happen again soon. And in this way, this mage almost destroyed the country of the magic tower. But he was stopped thanks to the magic tower having the archmage. And thanks to this incident, magical engineering gained recognition. Here we see someone watching them, while the prota had to continue listening to the mage, until he finally shuts up and the prota has to pretend that the topic seems fascinating to him. But at that moment, someone shouts the prota's name. He turns his head and sees a man who seems familiar to him, but he can't remember. The man accuses him of stealing the inheritance from the Saris family, to which the prota keeps wondering who this person is. But upon remembering the Saris surname, he realizes that this guy is the son of the big guy, and he was furious about the sword he won from his father. People around notice the sword the prota carries, and they start whispering that the merits the prota has don't belong to him, to which the prota tries to calm the big guy's son down. But he doesn't want to calm down and challenges him to a duel. If he wins, he will return the sword and ask for forgiveness on his knees. But if he loses, he will kneel and ask for forgiveness. The prota tells him that it's not right to fight at the crown prince's birthday party. And just at that moment, the prince arrives, and everyone bows, even the big guy's son and the prota, both apologizing, to which the prince tells them not to apologize, and mentions that it will be interesting to see a fight between the big guy's son and the prota, saying it will be the best birthday gift. The prota mentions that the crown prince considers himself the best candidate to become emperor, but he has a flaw. He is a maniac for battles, so he can't reject his suggestion, but he doesn't know what to do, to which the big guy's son thanks him for allowing him to fight, for after all, his father never recognized him, unlike the prota. But since he believes the prota uses some trick, he wants to expose him and claim his family's inheritance. All of this, he thinks the prota is scared. But in reality, he feels excited to teach the big guy's son a lesson. A few moments later, they stand face to face, ready for battle. The big guy's son is already ready, but upon noticing the prota's mocking face, he gets angry and charges in to attack. But just as he gets close, he receives a hit to his head. Surprising the prince and a white-haired boy, the prota apologizes, saying that he was surprised and his sword fell on his head. So he wants to mark this duel as invalid, to which the prince takes the prota's word and decides to resume the fight. The big guy's son doesn't understand what happened, but he knows a swordsman doesn't make those mistakes. But seeing the prota's mocking face, saying to finish this quickly, the big guy's son gets angry again and charges in for another attack. The prota begins to dodge the big guy's son's attacks, realizing that his sword skills are just like his father's. But as he blocks it, he tells him that his sword feels lighter than his father's, saying that it's just a mere copy of his father's sword skills, which makes him explode in fury. The prota plans to show him the sword technique he used with his father, so he charges at him with incredible speed, surprising the big guy's son. He tries to block, but the prota redirects his sword, just like he did with the boy's father, and lands a blow to his face, making him fall. Devil notices that the prota is being harsher than he thought, to which the prota tells him that if he doesn't knock him out, he'll keep fighting until one of them dies. But even that blow wasn't enough, for the big guy's son, full of anger, manages to resist it and prepares for the next attack. But the prota, with a quick strike, ends the duel once and for all. Before the big guy's son could fall, he's caught by someone else. The prota, upon seeing him, wonders if he's someone the big guy's son knows, but he doesn't care either way, as he's one of the 3 people he came to find. This is the younger brother of the Sword King, the one who betrayed him in his past life, Duel. He greets the prota warmly. The prota explains that this boy belongs to the northern ducal house of the Sayers family, named the Konos Duchy, the strongest knights, and they choose their lord based on martial skills, mentioning that if he had been reborn into that family, he would have already become a swordmaster. Devil asks the protagonist why he isn't going to talk to him. After all, this is the best opportunity. To which the protagonist replies that he will have an even better opportunity. Meanwhile, we see that many people are watching him excitedly. He notices their gazes, and everyone starts introducing themselves to the protagonist, to which he suddenly begins to feel overwhelmed. A while later, we see the protagonist on the terrace. Devil mentions that these people are two-faced, as they initially looked down on the protagonist compared to the man until they saw that he won the fight, to which the protagonist tells him that humans are like that so they can't be trusted, mentioning that he doesn't trust him either, to which Devil tells him that he does trust him, which surprises the protagonist, as Devil got a bit sentimental, to which Devil tells him that since the protagonist resembles a troll, he can trust him 100%. The protagonist threatens him by saying that when they return, he has 100 holy potions ready to ingest. At that moment, a girl appears, mentioning that she recognized the swordsmanship of the king of mercenaries used by the protagonist. The protagonist is surprised, but he was expecting her anyway. The last person he expected to see, the protagonist asks the girl if she has seen this swordsmanship anywhere, to which she tells him no, but that she has heard of it. A swordsmanship that can make any defense useless. The protagonist asks her if she doesn't find these banquets boring. Although she disguises herself, she can't ignore that aura. She has fought it hundreds of times, calling it Miketa Florens. She then reveals her true appearance, and we see that she is the Silver Witch. She asks how he awakened the sword, to which the protagonist tells her that with the help of a friend he knew she would come if she saw the Beelzebub sword. She thinks the protagonist is trying to deceive her, and begins releasing a sinister aura. This catches the protagonist off guard, to which she asks where the demonic energy emanating from his body is coming from. The protagonist notices her murderous aura and thinks that by demonic energy, she is referring to the curse on his body. But now he has to try to calm her down, so he tells her that he is on her side, to which she says that he doesn't know anything about her. The protagonist begins to reveal all his information about her. The leader of the moderate faction of Dark Wizards, Fire of Florens, the Silver Witch, the last line of the Dark Wizard Kingdom, the Florens Kingdom, and also the leader of the White Moon Intelligence Organization. All this information surprises the Silver Witch. She asks the protagonist how he knows all this. The protagonist notices that her murderous intent has disappeared, but he evades the question and tells her that there is no time, as something is going to happen soon. She gets angry because the protagonist evaded the question. But at that moment, a giant magic circle appears in the mansion's garden. The Silver Witch realizes it is a magic circle to summon monsters. And the protagonist tells her that the only way to get rid of the magic circle is to defeat the one who summoned it. He also mentions that he knows she has many questions for him, but it will be better to talk at another time. He also tells her that he knows she came looking for the Chaos Group of Dark Wizards, which surprises her, since the protagonist even knows this information, which she never told him. She tells him that he is right, and that they will talk at a better time. Saying that, she disappears at high speed. Now we see how the undead appear. They burst into the banquet, but the big guy's son charges at them and finishes them off. The protagonist was watching everything from above, realizing that the big guy's son is already able to use the sword aura. On the other hand, a troll undead appears. The redhead tells them to fall back, but the white-haired boy charges into the attack and finishes off the troll. The protagonist realizes that this boy is about to reach the Swordmaster stage. Devil asks the protagonist why he isn't intervening, to which the protagonist replies that they can handle it on their own. Also, there is something he needs to confirm, while we see this armored monster looking for the white-haired boy, who, upon finding him, charges toward him. Doge is surprised and doesn't have time to react, but the protagonist manages to block the attack with his shield. He mentions that he has been waiting for that monster, the strongest of the undead. He mentions that Doge died at the hands of this undead in his past life, which is strange because as a semi-sword master, he should be able to defeat him. But the protagonist now notices that the monster was strengthened by dark magic, and he could only stop the attack thanks to the spiritual shield. He now understands why Doge lost to this undead in his past life, and realized that the undead are working to separate Doge from the rest, since the entire attack is aimed at finishing him off. The protagonist notices the overwhelming power of the undead, and we see that Doyas was already preparing an attack, which, when the protagonist gives the signal, he attacks. But that attack only moved him a couple of meters without causing any damage. They learn this. The protagonist wonders why they are behind Doyas, since only someone who feels threatened by him would do that. To which the protagonist quickly realizes who is behind it all. Doyas's older brother, plus the guy who betrayed him in his past life. Now he understands. Since Doyas has great talent, and if he keeps going like this, he will soon surpass his brother, making him overshadowed. And if that happens, the most he will become is a great knight. And now he understands why he became the Night King in his past life. Since, with his younger brother's absence, he had a free path to become the Night King. What angers the protagonist even more is that the one who betrayed him is even working together with the Dark Wizards. Doyas doesn't know how to get out of this. To which the protagonist tells him that he knows a tactic designed by him to come out victorious. And that technique is provocation. Doge's disappointed expression is noticeable from afar, but Unasi decides to use that method. The monster was already tired of waiting, so it charged at them. But the protagonist blocked it again, to which Heir took the chance and attacked again. But the monster realizes, and manages, to dodge just in time. Doge realizes he didn't hit it, and the monster leaps to attack, to which Doge doesn't have time to dodge, and the monster seemingly hits its mark. But their plans are once again thwarted by the protagonist, who begins mocking him because he blocked his attack again, which enrages the monster, mentioning that it will finish him off first. And so they continued, the protagonist blocking while Doge only focused on attacking. The hall was completely destroyed. Monster was furious. Doge doesn't know if they can win, since they've only been able to block the attacks without causing any damage, to which the protagonist starts laughing like a madman. Devil thinks the protagonist has gone crazy, and tells him that he doesn't want to die, since if the protagonist dies, so does he, to which the protagonist reassures him by saying that he's not attacking because he decided not to. This leaves Devil confused, to which the protagonist goes on to explain that his shield is made from a crazy spirit. But to summarize everything, basically, the more he blocks with that shield, the more the spirit's madness will increase, which will make his strength grow, and the madness will also be shared. Saying that, the protagonist, now much stronger thanks to the hits received by the shield, attacks the monster at an incredible speed. Doge is surprised and thinks that the protagonist has been hiding a Zenny Master power all this time. But more than that, because the protagonist managed to hurt the monster for the first time. The protagonist is overflowing with power. He knows he needs to finish it quickly. For this reason, he activates the speed ring. The monster attacks, but the protagonist moves so fast that it didn't even manage to touch him. Doyus is surprised by the protagonist's speed, realizing that he's even faster than before. The monster is even angrier. The protagonist decides it's time to finish, moving in such a way that he begins to attack the monster from all directions. The monster knows that if it dies, the mission will fail, so it must complete its mission no matter what. So it charges at Doyus. He has no chance of dodging it. The protagonist starts to feel the effects of using the speed ring, so he can't move. But just before the monster manages to attack Doyus, the big guy's son appears with the intention of attacking the monster. He knows he's not as strong as Doyus, but as his best friend and rival, he must protect him. But then he remembers the words of the protagonist telling him that his sword is lighter compared to his father's. This awakens a power in him, and Akaskafi Saber, Shaksagahe. At great speed, he manages to hurt the monster, surprising everyone in Biasta Ast and causing it to disintegrate, making the other summoned monsters disintegrate simultaneously. The soldiers start celebrating the big guy's son for finishing off the armored monster. Even Doyus thanked him for saving him, mentioning that he reached the semi-sword master stage. But through all this, he doesn't believe it, since the contact with the monster felt very light. But on the other hand, Doyus also wants to thank the protagonist, but to his surprise, he had already left. And moving on to the protagonist, we see him walking, trembling. He mentions that pushing his speed power so much took its toll. And if he doesn't rest, he could end up resting forever. He also mentions that thanks to the overwhelming strength of the Silver Witch, everything turned out fine, since she took care of finishing of all the dark wizards, which made it seem like the summoned monsters disappeared. For that reason, it seemed like the big guy's son had defeated the armored monster. But that wasn't the case. Now we see Lowen running very worried about the protagonist. Since he's like an old man holding onto his cane, the protagonist asks him what he's been doing, to which he, with a broken face, tells him that he was dealing with the undead. The protagonist understands and tells him that it's best to rest for now. The next day, the protagonist wakes up in his bed, and looking to the side, he notices that the Silver Witch is lying next to him. He screams in fear. To which she tells him that no matter how much he screams, no one will hear him, since she placed a barrier to block the sound. He knew this would happen, but he didn't expect it to happen the next day. To which she tells him that now that they can talk, she asks him with a good-natured murderous intent how he knows about her. The protagonist tells her that he shares the same goal. To which she calms down and asks how a noble would have the same goal. To which the protagonist responds that he also hates dark mages, causing the murderous intent to return. And very angrily, she asks what's up with dark mages, since she is also a dark mage. To which the protagonist tells her that today's dark mages have lost their principles, which surprises the witch with his comment. The protagonist explains that dark mages were originally created to eliminate evil from the land alongside monsters, but today's mages have strayed from their path. So he extends his hand to work together. That way he will provide her with more information. She is surprised because the protagonist not only knows dark mages well, but also accepts them. She doesn't know if the protagonist is being honest, to which she replies that as the leader of an intelligence organization, there is nothing the protagonist could tell her that she doesn't already know. The protagonist then leans in and tells her that there is information only he knows. He moves closer to her ear and tells her that he has information about the future. But at that moment, someone opens the door. It was Logan with the big guy's son. He had come to visit. But upon seeing the protagonist in a compromising position, he shuts the door in embarrassment. The protagonist yells, trying to explain that it's all a misunderstanding. A few moments later, the protagonist tries to explain to the big guy's son that it was all a misunderstanding. But judging by his face, he was clearly imagining something else. But going back a few minutes, the protagonist had told the Silver Witch that in the future, Valken Estate's land of abundance would suffer a drought in 3 months. To which she doesn't believe him, as, since the empire was founded, the land of abundance has never had a drought. But the protagonist no longer has time to explain. So he drags her away, saying he doesn't want any more misunderstandings and that they'll talk later. She warns him that he better not be lying, because even if he runs, she will find him. This makes him tremble, despite knowing that he is telling the truth. Meanwhile, the protagonist asks the big guy's son why he has come and if he wants another fight, to which he replies that he didn't come for that, and admits that the sword does belong to the protagonist. Then he lowers his head and thanks him for saving Doyas. He also mentions that he wasn't the one who finished off the undead, as it disappeared before he could strike. But in any case, he felt that his power had increased. The protagonist is surprised that he doesn't resemble his father. But then, the big guy's son says that he acknowledges him as his rival, and that one day, he will defeat him and claim his family's inheritance. This makes the protagonist realize that he is exactly like the big guy. A few days later, we see the protagonist returning to his family mansion. Logan thanks him for the gifts the protagonist gave him, as it turns out that for his participation in the attack on the Imperial Mansion, he was rewarded with enough money to buy several mansions. So he bought several gifts for his parents and subordinates, but what mattered most to him was that the alchemist's daughter liked her gift. But he believes she definitely will. However, once they arrive in the town where he lives, all the villagers welcome him as a hero for protecting the Imperial Mansion. The protagonist is embarrassed by all the attention, as he is not used to it, but out of nowhere he is shocked, because a muscular statue of him has been erected in the city. Logan tells the protagonist that his father had it made in secret after he defeated the upper trunk. Once they arrive at the mansion, the protagonist sends Logan to distribute the gifts. Meanwhile, he heads to his father's office to ask why he made that disgusting statue. But on the way, he comes across one of his servants and notices that he looks discouraged. He recalls that apparently everyone in the mansion seems down, and he thinks it's because of the statue, as it makes him look very arrogant. But once he enters the Duke's office, even he looks dispirited. The protagonist doesn't understand what's going on, to which the Duke tells him that the alchemist and his daughter were taken by the Inquisitors of Heir, sent by the Church of the Sacred Fire. He mentions that this is beyond his power. This leaves the protagonist in shock. His father mentions that he tried to stop them, but the Inquisitors said that the alchemist and his daughter were fugitives from the church. Moreover, the alchemist agreed to go voluntarily, so he couldn't do anything. The protagonist slams the desk in frustration and turns to leave. His father asks him not to interfere, as they cannot oppose the three great churches. Otherwise, the entire family could face serious trouble. The protagonist smiles at him and says that he just wants to see their faces one last time. His father understands, and the protagonist leaves. Once outside the office, he looks extremely furious and says that they made a mistake by taking his manager without his permission. Moreover, if they have harmed either of them, he will crush them. Here, we are told about the three main regions of the continent, each of which has its own god. These are the cult of the sacred fire, divine butchery, and the cult of divine law. Since each of them has churches that represent and symbolize their respective gods, not even the empire can interfere with them carelessly, and the saint is a human chosen by the god who symbolizes the cult. Saints are agents of God who impose the will and power of God on earth and serve as a bridge connecting God and humans. As the protagonist is traveling somewhere, he mentions that the Church of the Sacred Fire is located in Dekibi, and that they haven't had a saint for decades, which has caused their power to decline, now reduced to less than a fifth of its original strength. Once they arrive at their destination, we see that the one who brought him was the same merchant to whom he sold the troll. The protagonist had asked him to take him there as he saved a lot of time by using the merchant's route. On the other hand, Lowen couldn't stop vomiting from the journey. They had arrived at the Church of the Sacred Fire, the same one that took the alchemist and his daughter. They had closed their doors to the public, not even allowing people with health problems to enter. And the protagonist mentions that at this time of year, the church should be open and full of people seeking healing. But ever since they took the alchemist and his daughter, they have closed their doors, so there must be a connection. The merchant asks the protagonist how he plans to get in, to which he simply lets out a sinister laugh. This slightly worries the merchant, but in a scene change, we see the protagonist arriving at the entrance of the church. He demands entry, citing his status as the Duke's son, but the guards still do not allow him inside. So the protagonist has no choice but to step up to one of them and make him eat dirt. The other one also tries to intervene, but the protagonist delivers a strike to his neck, sending him into a deep sleep. The guards inside notice someone opening the doors, and upon seeing the protagonist, they shout that he must not be allowed to enter. Meanwhile, the protagonist warns Diablo to be careful, as this place is full of sacred energy. Diablo asks how he plans to find the alchemist and his daughter, to which the protagonist replies that the first thing he needs to do is ring the lament bell. As we see, he activates the speed ring. Once activated, he moves at great speed. Diablo asks what the lamenting bell is, to which the protagonist explains that it is one of the laws of the Church of the Sacred Fire. When someone suffers a grave injustice or has a critical illness with no cure, they can ring the lamenting bell to meet with the high priest without interference. However, people started ringing it for trivial matters, so it was moved to the top of the building to prevent misuse. But just as he was about to reach the church, a large and muscular man attacks him with a spiked ball. After a massive cloud of dust, we see that the protagonist managed to dodge just in time, though he is surprised. Despite using the speed ring, that man was able to aim at him perfectly. The man introduces himself as Vali, the highest-ranking monk of the church. In addition to guarding the bell, the protagonist realizes that he has already used up the daily limit of his speed ring. So he draws his sword. The massive man happily charges at him, but the protagonist manages to block the attack. He notices the overwhelming strength of the large man, even without using mana. Diablo realizes that all the powerful people he has met are crazy, so the protagonist takes out his spiritual shield, intending to block an attack and then counter. But once again, as the large man charges, he strikes with his mace. However, the moment the shield makes contact, it shatters, causing the protagonist to take the full force of the attack, sending him flying. The impact severely injures the protagonist. The large man walks over to deliver the final blow, but something flies out of the dust cloud. It is the protagonist's sword, which manages to cut the man's cheek. The man is surprised that he can still move, but he still prepares to finish him off, believing that a warrior without a sword is nothing. However, the protagonist laughs, confusing his opponent as he recalls that the lamenting bell is behind them. Once the man looks back, he realizes that the protagonist's sword is embedded in the bell, making it ring. Despite his injuries, the protagonist demands that since he rang the bell, they must bring the high priest. After that, he loses consciousness and collapses, making the large man admit that he has lost this time. Sometime later, in the church, we see the protagonist fully healed. Diablo urges him to leave, as while he was unconscious he was treated terribly. To heal him, they used pure sacred energy, which was torture for him. The protagonist, somewhat annoyed, tells Diablo that he deserved it for invading his body, which enrages Diablo. But just then, someone knocks on the door and enters. It is the vice high priest. Diablo asks the protagonist if he knows him, to which he responds that he does. That old man is the successor to the current high priest. In his past life, when he became a priest, he was the last one, as corruption destroyed the entire order of the sacred fire. However, he appears more normal than the protagonist had imagined. The protagonist apologizes for entering the church, but the old man tells him not to worry. Since he rang the bell, he is now a guest of the church. The large man also comes to see the protagonist and formally introduces himself. He apologizes for breaking the shield, saying that the church has many shields, so the protagonist can take whichever he wants. The protagonist tells him it is unnecessary, as his shield is special and can regenerate, which surprises the large man. In his mind, the protagonist notes that while the shield can regenerate, it will take at least 4 days to fully recover, as it was completely destroyed. Now the protagonist tells the priest that he needs to see the high priest. The old man replies that, despite ringing the bell, it is impossible to see the high priest right now, but the highest authority will meet with him instead. This makes the protagonist suspicious, as even after ringing the bell, he is unable to meet the high priest. Moments later, we see the protagonist being escorted to the one with the highest authority after the high priest. The protagonist wonders who could hold such authority, surpassing even the vice high priest. But when they arrive at their destination, the protagonist is utterly shocked. He sees the alchemist and his daughter looking quite happy. But not only that, the vice high priest and the large man kneel before them. They declare that the alchemist's daughter is the new saint of the Sacred Fire faction. This leaves the protagonist completely stunned. In a scene change, the protagonist asks the alchemist how his daughter became the saint of the Church of the Sacred Fire. The alchemist reintroduces himself as a former member of the Society of the Seven Stars, serving the Master of the Sacred Fire, which completely shocks the protagonist. The Order of the Stars consists of the 7 greatest alchemists in the Order of the Sacred Fire. Now, the protagonist understands why he has never met an alchemist as skilled as him. He asks how someone so important ended up living in poverty. The alchemist explains that every 40 years, a saint is born to become the high priest. Then, after another 40 years, the title of saint is passed on. But for the past 10 years, candidates for sainthood who bore the mark were assassinated, whether adults or infants. All were eliminated. Upon realizing that his daughter was a candidate, he decided to protect her by taking her to a place where she would never be found. But he mentions that recently, an incident as serious as the assassination of the saint candidates has emerged within the order. The protagonist is shocked, as in his past life, such an incident never occurred within the Order of the Sacred Fire. He wonders what is happening to the order. A few days ago, we see a dispute in the Duke's mansion where the church wanted to take the alchemist and his daughter, but the guards refused to allow it unless the protagonist agreed. However, at that moment, the alchemist comes out and asks to speak with the church representatives, as they apparently already knew each other. Once alone, the church official tells the alchemist that they must return to the church. The alchemist asks how they were found. The official explains that after they left the church, he assumed they were dead, but when no new saint was born, he realized they were still alive. After the incident in the slums, he was able to track them down. However, the alchemist refuses to leave, fearing that someone will try to kill his daughter. But the official tells him they have no choice, as the high priest has collapsed due to illness. The protagonist is completely shocked upon hearing that the high priest is sick. The alchemist tells him that without the high priest, the Church of the Sacred Fire will collapse. So in 4 days, they plan to make his daughter the saint and use her divine powers to heal the high priest. He apologizes to the protagonist for causing trouble. But the protagonist can only think about how this all happened, as in his past life the high priest would have fallen ill in 3 years. He begins to suspect that his return to the past is starting to change the future. Now, we see the protagonist being escorted to the high priest's room. He needs to find out what event in the past altered the future, so he will stay in the church a bit longer with the alchemist's permission. Upon entering the room, he notices a foul smell and sees that the high priest is in terrible condition. But then, he detects a dark yet familiar aura emanating from the high priest. He doesn't recognize it, but Diablo tells him it is a curse. This surprises the protagonist. Normally, humans cannot see it, but because he is fused with Diablo, he is able to perceive it. The protagonist is close to the high priest because, in his past life, the priest saved his life. Since he never repaid his debt before the priest died, he wants to repay it in this life. Diablo explains that the high priest's curse has been accumulating for a long time, slowly causing his body to disintegrate from within. The protagonist knows that curses are exclusive to dark wizards. Since this curse was placed long ago, it means that a dark wizard within the church is targeting the high priest, making the protagonist furious. He asks Diablo if there is any way to break the curse. Diablo tells him that the curse has fused so deeply with the priest's body that even the one who cast it likely couldn't remove it. But maybe there are 2 methods. Either a dark mage who perfectly understands curses manages to break it, or an immense amount of sacred power all at once. The protagonist realizes that the alchemist's daughter is most likely the next target. If he cures the high priest, the dark mage's plans will fall apart. So it's very likely that the dark mage will try to eliminate her. The protagonist needs to speak with the alchemist to strengthen his daughter's security. But at that very moment, he hears the daughter of the priest scream. He rushes at full speed, believing that the dark mage has already made his move. But when he arrives at the girl's room, he finds her crying. Apparently, when the maid came to change the candles, she blew them out, and the alchemist's daughter suddenly started screaming and trembling. The protagonist now remembers that back in the Duke's mansion, she always slept with the lights on. He assumes she still hasn't overcome the trauma of being locked in a dark cell. The protagonist asks the alchemist to clear the room, as the girl is extremely frightened. Once everyone leaves, we see the girl's subconscious. She is crying in complete darkness. But then, she sees a glimmer of hope as the protagonist extends his hand to help her. She jumps and embraces him. The protagonist watches her calmly, and after a few moments, she has finally calmed down. She asks the protagonist if she is truly fit to be a saint. She read in books that saints are brave and strong, yet she is weak, and all she really wants is to return to the Duke's mansion and play. The protagonist flicks her forehead, and tells her that she doesn't understand what it means to be a saint. She then asks if he does, and with a smile he tells her yes, because in the past, he and the saint were companions. But then, he remembers the saint's betrayal and falls silent, his expression darkening. The girl is thrilled to hear they were companions. The protagonist tells her that a saint doesn't have to be brave or kind. After all, they are human too. It's okay to cry. He tells her she can return to the Duke's mansion whenever she wants. This makes her very happy. But then, they change the subject, and the girl starts bombarding the protagonist with questions about his relationship with the saint. In the next scene, we see the protagonist leaving, exhausted from the endless questions. The alchemist enters the room, relieved to see his daughter has recovered. But before leaving, the protagonist encounters the vice high priest, who thanks him for calming the future saint. As a sign of gratitude, he extends his hand for a handshake. But the moment their hands touch, Diablo's personality completely shifts. He warns the protagonist that the man before him is the dark mage. The protagonist is shocked. He never imagined that old man was the dark mage. Sometime later, in the underground chamber of the church, the vice high priest is furious that the alchemist's daughter is still alive. He says he should have eliminated them when they escaped. Now that the saint has returned, he won't be able to seize control of the church. His subordinate urges him to calm down. At first he refuses, but then he remembers, certain individuals will be arriving soon. In 2 days, during the saint's awakening ceremony, she will be eliminated by his followers. With her out of the way, no one will stand in his path, and he will take control of the church. The protagonist is observing all of this from the shadows. He realizes the old man has more followers than expected. Diablo smirks, confirming that he successfully identified the dark mage. He also notes that this dark mage is quite powerful. The protagonist notices something strange. He wonders why the old man accelerated the curse on the high priest. In his past life, it happened 3 years later. He realizes that he must have changed more than just saving the alchemist and his daughter. But he also wonders, who are these people that are coming? A little later, we see a hooded figure. This figure meets with another person in an alleyway. The man in the alley complains that their organization is in disarray. The hooded figure shouts back that because of him, they had to speed things up. After all, they never imagined the saint was still alive. The protagonist is eavesdropping on the entire conversation. Now he knows who is responsible for accelerating the events. He also finds the voice of the man in the alley strangely familiar. The hooded figure argues that if the vice high priest becomes the high priest, it will benefit them both. But the alley man gets furious and grabs the hooded figure by the neck. Then, he throws him aside. The protagonist finally catches a glimpse of his face and is shocked. It's the Scarlet Knight, Benninger. Now, the protagonist understands. After all, Benninger was the lapdog of that white-haired man who betrayed him in his past life. He remembers that in his past life the white-haired man swore to destroy all dark mages. But now he realizes the entire Night Order was rotten from the start. He is growing tired of seeing so many hidden faces behind false masks. Diablo wonders why the white-haired man would help the old priest. The protagonist suspects it must be to take over his family. After all, leadership isn't just about strength. It requires the support of influential forces. His first plan was likely to eliminate his younger brother to become the sole heir. But things changed when the protagonist saved Doyes. He now sees just how corrupt the white-haired man truly is. Just then, the protagonist realizes that the red-haired man has found him. The red-haired man immediately launches an attack. The protagonist dodges, and the red-haired man asks who he is. Seeing that the protagonist refuses to answer, he simply laughs. The protagonist knows he can't win in his current state, so he tries to escape. But the red-haired man moves so fast that in the blink of an eye, he's right in front of him. A fight breaks out. The protagonist acknowledges that without his shield, which is still regenerating, he stands no chance. Moreover, this man might be the strongest sword aura user he knows. They continue clashing until the protagonist calls him by his name, revealing that he has recognized him. The red-haired man is surprised and assumes the protagonist belongs to Doyes' faction based on his swordsmanship. But instead of stopping, he resumes his attacks, and the protagonist keeps blocking until suddenly the red-haired man's nose starts bleeding. The protagonist takes advantage of the moment and strikes, knocking him off balance. The protagonist reveals that he used a sword technique called resonance. It works by creating mana waves each time their swords clash, subtly disrupting the opponent's mana flow. At first, It's barely noticeable, but as it accumulates, it becomes a lethal poison. Against an ordinary soldier, it would have already been fatal. He acknowledges that the red-haired man is exceptionally strong. The red-haired man angrily shouts at the protagonist to fight him head-on, but the protagonist smirks and refuses, taunting him to come instead. This enrages the red-haired man even more. The protagonist then calls him a lapdog of the white-haired man. Infuriating him further, he lunges at the protagonist, but the protagonist throws a bottle. The redhead breaks it with his sword, creating a cloud of smoke. The redhead searches for the protagonist, but realizes he has escaped. Now we see the protagonist. He mentions that defeating someone with a high-level sword aura is nearly impossible without his spiritual shield. He notes that asking Cassie for a smoke bomb was a good idea. More importantly, he needs to catch the hooded man who fled before he can reveal anything. Once he catches him, he simply eliminates him in a single strike. The next morning, the old man is furious, believing he was betrayed by the hooded man and the redhead since they were supposed to return but never did. However, he must stop the Saint's awakening ceremony at all costs. Since he is running out of time, he mentions that he has the perfect pawn to frame as a suspect, and he will now execute his plan B. The day of the ceremony arrives, and the alchemist is very happy for his daughter's ceremony. She enters the ceremony hall alone as no one is allowed to accompany her. Her father wants to go, but the protagonist stops him. The vice high priest asks to speak with the protagonist in private, so they both move to a secluded corner. The protagonist asks why they must speak alone, and the old man replies that he simply wants to give him a gift of gratitude for saving the church. When the protagonist opens the box, he sees something shining. The old man says it is the last pill of the highest quality in the church, and that he wanted to give it in private because if he did so in public, everyone would go crazy. Excited, the protagonist takes the pill and swallows it. However, upon doing so, it is revealed that this pill is different. The old man smirks wickedly, revealing that it is an obedience pill. Once he sees the protagonist is under its effect, he orders him to enter through the back entrance he prepared and eliminate the girl undergoing the saint's ceremony. Now we see the girl. She must walk into the flames to supposedly see God. She fears that the flames will burn her, but she remembers the protagonist's words, that God should be the one afraid, because she needs to make him pay for all the suffering she endured. With that mindset, she steps into the flames, while the protagonist follows behind her, apparently obeying the old man's orders. Outside the altar, the old man is pleased, as he has the perfect story. They entered the altar and killed the girl. But just then, a massive man arrives with a small army of armed religious followers. The old man is furious at the interruption, but the giant man says he knows. However, there is something urgent, as he declares that a dark mage is hiding within the church. The other followers begin murmuring. The old man wonders how he knew, but he is quickly shocked when he sees the high priest standing before him, completely healed. The high priest announces that he was the one who called this gathering, leaving the old man stunned. He wonders who could have had enough divine power, aside from the saint, to break the curse he placed years ago. The high priest tells the old man that everything is over, making everyone turn to look at him. They ask how it is possible that he is the dark mage. The old man tries to defend himself, claiming that this is all a misunderstanding, and that the real dark mage is the protagonist. Just then, the protagonist emerges from the altar. The old man assumes the protagonist has followed his order and, pretending to be concerned, shouts, asking him what he did with the saint. The protagonist casually responds that she is in the awakening ceremony. The old man is shocked, wondering how the protagonist broke the pill's curse. Now we jump back to the night after the protagonist fought the redhead. He notices through the window that he is being watched by the Silver Witch. She approaches in the form of an owl. The protagonist tells her that the Chaos Dark Mage faction is planning something. Since Chaos is their mutual enemy, he asks her for a favor. She asks what favor, and the protagonist requests something, though we do not yet know what it is. It turns out what he wants of the Silver Witch is some magic artifact to suppress curses. This to suppress the curse of Archbishop Kittel, since taking into account that only his body is paralyzed and his consciousness is not there. Affected person must already know that the Bishop Jakal has betrayed the church. The witch thinks it's a great idea and delivers a ring capable of suppressing the magic just by using it. She recommends him to be careful as she is sure that Bishop Jackal has put brainwashing curses in the majority of the church and believes that it can do the same with him. But the protagonist asks not to worry, as he has worse curses. Hearing that, Devil felt touched because he thinks that the protagonist refers to him as a curse. But anyway, he was right. Now coming back. At present, the Archbishop asks Jackal to give up since he won't be able to escape, but he gets angry and starts to complain to life for not having been chosen by the sacred fire, since always dreamed of becoming a saint and fallen by that hatred. He mentions that he will kill all those present. The priest Musselman thinks they should finish off Jaka the hour before everything gets worse. But this orders his followers to help him, and followed by his followers began to appear, and the people who apparently they were against him began to be controlled and followed from that. They launched an attack against the other members of the church. The muscular priest, seeing the heretics, he tries to eliminate them, but the archbishop stops Hakal, while laughing mentions who has put a curse on domination, and most of them by that threatens to make them end between them and try to touch him. The protagonist counts 15 of the heretics and moving at high speed and ends up with 2 of them. The archbishop threatens him with finish them all off and do that again, but the protagonist doesn't care about that, mentioning that by not belonging to the church does not care what happens to them, and that all he wants is to hit the chaos bastards like him. Hakal no understands how he found out that he was part of the chaos and sends to attack all members of the church under his control. Devil asks the protagonist if he plans to kill innocent people, but he tells him no, and that the Chaos members are very weak now, which means that the curse will disappear with less of them, said that. He takes both bottles in its waist and with a jump sends them against the ground, generating a large cloud of dust. Hakal does not understand what it is, wants to achieve the protagonist with that movement, but once it falls to the ground, this one starts moving at high speed through the smoke. Hakal can feel like the number of dark wizards decreases, and it infuriates him to have invested 10 years of his life in this for nothing, so he doesn't see another way of implying that he will do something crazy. The protagonist continued chasing and killing the magician's dark. Now there were only 6 left counting on Hakal, but out of nowhere, he feels as the number begins to drop quickly and believes that the bald man muscular is also taking care of the dark wizards. But Devil informs him that the dark wizards are not disappearing, but all the dark mana is gathering into one place. Hakal was absorbing the whole dark mana of his lackeys. This begins to speak to the nobles of the underworld, offering them half of their life more the lives of his lackeys in exchange for descent among them. Upon hearing that the protagonist is shocked, as well as the members of the church and the archbishop, and followed by that, a portal starts to open in the sky. Followed by that, those who are being controlled return to normal. The portal turns red, and a light falls towards the earth, causing great havoc. The protagonist managed to protect the archbishop. This one feels a great danger for what? He asks the muscle man to take him, archbishop and the rest of the church, to a safe place from where the fell lightning can be seen as a silhouette of a demon. This demon mentions that they have. It's been centuries since he last set foot on the land. The protagonist knows that this demon will be a big problem, while Devil mentions that he didn't expect to see him, basically as if he knew him. Demon asks who summoned him to which. Jackal makes himself present and orders him to finish them all off, but instead to follow the order. The demon finishes him off, separating his head from his body while mocks him. The protagonist notices that this monster of the underworld is of the species that brought the world to destruction in his past life, and based on his intelligence, deduces that it must be high range, so much so that surely, even a master swordsman would find it difficult. Finish it. But he is sure that his self from the past, I could have finished it easily in one fell swoop. Then the protagonist notices that everyone around him they find the devil on the ground. Devil explains to him that the demon's specialty is called elusive fog, any being to breathe. The fog remains trapped in a nightmare, losing gradually his vitality, but that he does not affect you, since you are accompanied by him. The protagonist, upon hearing that note that the devil knows a lot about him, he tell him that this demon is Mephisto. He tried to scam him in the past, but eventually he subdued him and made him his slave. The protagonist lets out a smile as it seems funny that this demon has tried to defraud the monarch of the underworld, but from one moment to the next, Mephisto was already in front of him. protagonist is surprised while Mephisto is impressed that the protagonist can Forcan walking through its fog. This begins to tremble without being able to move, but Devil him asks him not to be afraid since Mephisto. It is not yet in its final form, since the human invocation is very stable, so that Mephisto at this moment can only access less than half of its strength. Upon hearing this, the protagonist calls him by his name what surprises him. Then the protagonist takes his sword and begins to make fun of him for ending up being the pet of the ruler of the underworld by having tried to scam him. Mephisto gets angry and tries to hit him, but the protagonist jumps and dodges him. The demon promises to destroy his soul for the rest of his life as they did in him. The protagonist does not understand what he means by that, to which Devil explains that in the past used Mephisto to experiment, and apparently he destroyed his soul several times. By doing that, the protagonist feels pain does not matter. It is absolutely surprising what the devil does such things, but now focuses on the fights, and mentions that he should stay away from people as he is putting them in danger during the fight, but the demon doesn't give him time and attacks him again. But again, the protagonist dodges it, but seeing the brutality of the blow, one wonders if really that is less than half of his strength. But Mephisto attacks him with a kick, which the protagonist blocks, but in the same way he is sent flying against the rubble. Mephisto mocks him, while the protagonist gets up, mentions that his shield is still being restoring it, so you can't use it, and there is only one way to win, but even if he doesn't like to resort to, that has no choice but to use it. This mentions that by eating the high pill quality that gave Hekal all his skills increased by 1 level, even an unexpected ability. Followed by that, this begins to release a black aura, and mentions that the skill that increased it was Beelzebub's, which basically, it consists of being able to invoke souls devoured, these skills called spiritual subjugation. By hearing that, Mephisto is surprised, because only the dark wizards who control dark mana can use that technique. Then the protagonist makes his first invocation, and we see that it is about that one orc wizard that the protagonist defeated in the past, and seeing that, Mephisto got angry. Now we see the alchemist's daughter, who is amazed by the beautiful view. And at that moment, it appears this man is somewhat annoyed, saying that take divine power and leave. This is the Lord of the Sacred Fire, the deity principle of the Church of Fire, sacred, one of the 3 largest religions. She asks him if he is the god, and blames him for everything that has happened, suffered. In addition to needing revenge with interest, the deity sees that the girl is very daring, and wonders how that happened, and wonders if she is contaminated. But in any case, I found it boring, and this will entertain a little. So he decides pay her for this life, and for life past this does not understand. What is it refers? Fachatat soraitas, and maniakomaka takailai. While he begins to shine, mentions that her destiny was exchanged for someone who lost his own destination, and hopes that your new journey will be different, returning to battle. Mephisto was dodging the orc fireballs to this one. It seems a nuisance. But after that, the protagonist attacks him from behind. He had completely forgotten about him, and consequently, the protagonist tears an arm next to a wing, falling to the ground, and the devil is really bitten furious. And to make matters worse, protagonist mocks him by calling him experiment number 1. In addition to that, he also mocks him by telling him to ask him to the Lord of the Underworld to give him another Yala's arm, but from Angel. But then he says to forget it, since he will die now, and thus, the magician unloads a powerful ball of fire on Mephisto. The protagonist apologizes to the devil for killing his test subject, but devil tells him to not yet declared victory, since Mephisto has not died so easily. And immediately after that, we see how the flames intensify, and Mephisto comes out of them completely regenerated. The protagonist is completely surprised since Mephisto even recovered his arm and wing. But the devil explains that Mephisto is different from others demons, and the main reason why I became a grade demon superior is because Mephisto has the resistance of all demons. Also that the fire does not work in him. The protagonist does not understand how it doesn't work if he clearly saw that Mephisto was afraid of fire, so the devil clarifies that he is indeed afraid of fire, since he once made an experiment with it to increase its fire resistance, and to make that experiment put him in the most hell-hot and hard from the underworld. Basically, the devil traumatized him. The protagonist is sure that he will not be able to beat him, but still has to protect many people what has no choice, and so they both launched an attack again. And in a small time skip, the protagonist finds himself completely defeated on the ground. This is no longer able to move a single muscle and wonders if this is where ends his second life, mentioning that even if he would have liked, at least take revenge on those who betrayed him. In addition, there are still many people what you want to protect, and what he cares about most annoying is that when he closes his eyes, he can only see the devil to what he says, that despite being arrogant and ignorant, will allow him to use his power. And thus, the system notifies him that he has woken up power of the Lord of the Underworld, and followed from that, Mephisto began to tremble. This doesn't understand what is happening to him, and soon, the protagonist opens his eyes. Mephisto knows the abominable aura perfectly well that comes out of the protagonist, and is in the form intimidatingly orders him to kneel, and without hesitation, Mephisto follows this order. He is completely terrified. Perfectly reminds us of the psychopath from Devil here. They tell us that the reason why, which is possible that the Lord of the Underworld will rule the Underworld, is by he absolute authority of domination awarded to whoever was elected to rule the Underworld, and now Mephisto was at the feet of the protagonist notices that the authority of domination is more powerful than what imagined devil begins to take out posters, pretending to be enlarged, but the protagonist has no choice but to play along, after all, is alive. Thanks to him, Mephisto then observes the protagonist and asks him if he really is the one Lord of the Underworld, to which the protagonist sees him and tells him that he is upset. So he wants me to help him cool down the head, to which Mephisto realizes that he is screwed. In a change of scene, we see the alchemist's daughter, leaving the room once outside, sees the protagonist and Mephisto on the floor, exhausted. She approaches the protagonist and says that everything went well with God, but that only made her shine and came back with empty hands. Then she asks who is the bat in the ground, to which the protagonist explains that he is just his friend's pet, and as they played a lot, now they are resting. Although the reality was that he made him suffer in an intense routine of exercises to the alchemist's daughter. It is very pitiful, and he strokes his head, but in doing so, Mephisto, burned in flames. This one thinks the devil is doing it, punishing with the endurance test to the fire, and begs him to stop. The protagonist realizes that the alchemist's daughter definitely got the awakening by other side. Devil warns the protagonist, do it now, to what is without waste time. Takes the sword, and activating the power of Beelzebub, this begins to devour him. Completely terrified, but Beelzebub does his work and devours it completely, and once everything ends, the protagonist falls unconscious of fatigue. For a few more days after the incident, the church began to persecute heretics. Many of them were hidden found, followed by a purge, large-scale within the church. Also, it was explained to the sleeping priests by Mephisto's ability. He helped the alchemist's daughter to defeat the dark magician. Also, that incident has made understand that he is still very weak, because even those who betrayed him did not, they would have had trouble defeating to Mephisto even now then. The archbishop comes to thank the protagonist for what he did for the church, since if Yusei would not have detected the heretics remaining, would not have been able to clean the church, then this one leans to thank him also for having found the lost saint. Since if there were no saint probably found, the church would have fallen into ruins. The protagonist tells him that he shouldn't thank him. After all, he owed a big favor to someone in the church, someone who always says that. You don't need a reason to help others. Besides, the old man is happy that someone from his church has that mentality, although what he doesn't know is that the protagonist is speaking of him. Then the archbishop told him that some members of the church have already told him the reasons for which he came to the church, and says that the saint needs to have the proper education that he did not have until now. But taking into account what happened in the last 10 years, should not become obsessed with her. So he decided to establish a branch of the church in the territory, remarries in that way. The alchemist's daughter could receive training there and staying in Rems at the same time. In addition to that, the founding of a branch of the church in Remes, it was good news since the church establishes its branches in cities with power and influence, which it means that a branch in Remes symbolized the power of the Remes family. Now deep in the forest, we see these two people who mentioned that they should not be allowed to make mistakes anymore, that they must make sure that Lord Sylvetta becomes the next Archduke. Now we see that the protagonist has already left for Remes. Lovin was having a bad time, Well, it turns out that the protagonist entrusted him with spying on the number of members of Chaos and became entangled in Sodium Curse of Aging. The good thing is who captured all the members of Chaos and thanks to the holy daughter of the alchemist, managed to cure him of the curse. Then, Levin asks the protagonist where he kept the huge reward that the church gave them, to what the protagonist shows him a small bag. This is a subspace pocket, an artifact that prevents objects from spoiling or rust once stored inside. Levin finds it a reward extreme, but the protagonist tells him no, they only gave him the gold and the bag, but which also fairy silk in addition in a strange room in the church. He found this egg, which he doesn't know about. That this may be, he found it next to an old book, and believing that it might bring clues to the egg, tried to read it, but it is found in a language he doesn't understand. When listening that explanation, Nine realizes that, in short, the protagonist stole the egg, but he doesn't see it that way, since he just walked into an old room and he found it, but Levin follows him looking like a robbery and demands that it return it, but he refuses, because he believes that a goose of the golden eggs could come out of the egg. In a change of scene, these arrive at the city of Logan believed that they would go back home and ask if he came to visit Tarot, to which the protagonist says yes, but who also has business in the Forest of Death, since someone told him that AN's living in that forest. In addition to that, you need an EN to make the elixir of the highest quality. The problem is that the guards won't let them pass anymore, that his lord is absent, but Levin gets angry and explains to them that he, the protagonist, is the son of Tuke Remez. When they hear that, makes the guards angry at the protagonist. He doesn't understand why they got angry, nothing to which the devil reminds him that he took the treasure from the Cetus family. In addition to that, he also hit the son of the Sir in the royal banquet. The protagonist now remembers it, and believes that just by showing his sword will let him in, but this fails. And the guards ask him to come back on another occasion, since his lord was not find the protagonist, then ask for it, talk to the redhead. But these very annoyedists, they tell him that the redhead finds him busy and asks again that he leaves, otherwise he will use the strength. Upon hearing that, the protagonist just turns around and apparently leaves. They think they won, but when the protagonist was a good distance away, begins to shout at the top of his lungs, mockingly of the redhead, from when he humiliated him in the banquet. These cries reached ears of the redhead, who ran against the protagonist. Once he arrives, he takes him the clothes, very furious, asking him what does he want to humiliate him on his territory? To which the protagonist replies that the guards told him they wouldn't let him enter unless I said that guards try to deny it, but the protagonist steps forward and asks the redhead talk inside, and once in the room, the redhead's house, the protagonist asks if his father is there busy. The redhead assures him that his father is in the Tower of the Slaughter right now, since it seems that something unusual has happened in the Wasteland of the Death that is in charge of the Tower of the Slaughter. In addition to that, also, they suspect that the tall troll that appeared in the Remez territory, it comes from there. The protagonist knows that the incident's strange things began to happen now, and that soon several level monsters, calamity, will appear in your past. Life was so busy dealing with these sudden incidents that did not have time to find out what caused them. But now that he knows everything needs to become strong, quickly find the cause and prevent it. The redhead asks the reason why he came to his territory. The protagonist answers is that he wants to go to the Forest of Death. The redhead warns him that the forest is covered of undead poisonous plants and poison monsters. But the protagonist answers that that's the reason why he wants to go. Redhead doesn't understand why he wants to go, but tells him he can't go to the forest right now, and start explaining to him that in addition to having monsters and plants, poisonous criminals, and those so poor people who can't even pay taxes end up choosing that place as their refuge. But recently, bandits appeared in the forest in Tal. It seems they are looting the village. Also, since they appeared, there has been reports of missing persons within of the territory, and believe that the bandits are connected to those disappearances. So they plan to subject the bandits carrying the Order of Knights to the forest. And even if it is one Tala and Kema farming village, after all, they are people from their territory, so they can't just sit and see how the bandits hurt them like this. That if he wants to enter the forest, he must wait for the bandits to be subdued, or just tells him to give up and go. When the protagonist sees that he can't enter to the forest, lowers his head, and the redhead is moved, because he believes that the protagonist was saddened by not being able to help the inhabitants of the forest. But really, this one was upset because he is afraid that the bandits discover and capture to the one who needs it. But as he doesn't want that, tells the redhead that he wants to go to the forest to help and so on. For a while longer late, they were in the fortress from Cetus. The protagonist and Iogen met warming up the guards they found nothing to like about the protagonist and Lovin, and they let the redhead who, when listening to it, becomes enraged because the protagonist is risking his life for the people of Cetus, is also bothered by the fact that his gentleman think of his honor instead of his people. He also makes it clear that he and his father already recognized his strength, despite about his attitude then. The protagonist asks him to the redhead if the soldiers who brought will be enough, since it is assumed that the number of bandits is quite high, to what the redhead answers that for that very reason hired a reliable mercenary, and while they mention the freshest said, this mercenary arrives at the protagonist's site, is shocked because apparently he knows her. Devil can feel something that dislikes the girl, and once she arrives, this is presented as a servant moon from the great god of carnage. The protagonist is impressed that the redhead is hired. Although it seems to the lion different from what the rumors say, since he has heard that the priests of the cult of divine carnage are full of madness. But she looks quite normal. The protagonist tells him that. He thought the same thing at first, and that we'll soon discover about it. The priestess goes to the protagonist, is heard a lot about he for what this is presented, and mentions that it's been a long time since he last knew associated with a priest of the cult of the divine carnage, to which the girl assumes that he has known her other's companions before, and the protagonist, with the vein about to explode, tells him that yes, and we see that it is about that one betrayed him in the past. The girl excites and believes that it is the destiny that is have found. In addition to that, it is eager to finish off the bandits. Protagonist mentions that the cult of the divine carnage is one of the 3 great religions with divine power specialized in combat. So he is sure that the girl will not have problems in confronting the bandits, and so the redhead gives the order to enter the forest of death a little while later as they go deeper into each. Once again in the forest, the protagonist can feel something strange, and Devil Take It confirms that he can feel an energy sinister emanating from the ground like. In the underworld, the protagonist is impressed that there are humans living in this forest, taking into account the poison and the evil energy that emanates from all parts, and it makes him angry that the rabbit has intentionally sent to a place so dangerous that he will give a lesson the next time I see him. And changing the subject, he asks the redhead if it's okay that there is hired the girl, because he knows that her father doesn't like mercenaries. And although she is a priestess of the cult of divine carnage continues, being a mercenary, the redhead knows that his father doesn't like it, and that's Siparo. Even if he finds out, he will be scolded severely, but does not care if it is with such as to save his people. But while they speak, these arrive at the first, but at sea these are completely horrified because they arrived too late, because the village and its inhabitants were already completely destroyed. In total, there is 5 villages in the forest. And once they saw that the first village was completely destroyed and without inhabitants, they went quickly to the second one, which had also been destroyed. The third village also suffered the same fate, even when reaching the fourth one. It is also, they came across a landscape reduced to ashes. These began to search survivors, but no one appeared. The protagonist does not understand, because he should even. There are militias in these villages. Suddenly, the soldiers find 2 survivors, 2 children. They were very scared. Redhead apologizes for having arrived late and introduces himself as a knight of Cetus. The girl runs to hug him, very scared. While the child begs her let the redhead save his parents, try to explain to him that his parents they should have died. But the child shouts that it is not like that, and that all the people from the village, as well as his parents, were sent to another place, and hearing that, the redhead rages for a few more hours later. They were on their way to the 5th village. The protagonist does not understand, because they took them to another place instead of finishing them off. Suddenly, the protagonist hears a noise in the bushes and warns the redhead that they are following. Upon hearing that, this is already quite angrily prepares to finish them off, believing that they are the bandits. But out of nowhere, those who followed them surround them, and when he sees them, he orders them to everyone put down their weapons. He did the same. The other side turns out not to be about the bandits, but the Oldens are the Ugo, which this old man is the leader of the 5th village, which also knows the Akhaf. This redhead says that the old man used to being a gentleman 10 years ago, but due to a serious injury, he had to retire, even though he never expected it to end in one of the villages. Then the redhead tells the old man that all the others' villages were ambushed and nothing remained. but he is glad that they haven't yet attacked the 5th village. But the old Ma clarifies that this is not the case a little later. When the old man takes them to his village, these are learned, because there are wounded everywhere. In addition to all, they are running from one side to the other to treat the wounds. The old man tells him, who have attacked their village several times, but as some of them were, knights managed to defend themselves until this point, but that one of the bandits had a strange power, something like the ability to resurrect dead bodies. Upon hearing that, the protagonist and the redhead, they are surprised because they know that it must be a dark wizard. Now, the protagonist understands how they managed to destroy everything so abruptly, from which they took the people in place to finish them. He is sure that they are sacrificing people for some plan of theirs, and he wonders when it was the last time they sacrificed humans such a large scale, but still believes that. They have not started since I would have known instantly then. He sees that the wounds with a purple glow do not heal with normal passions, so he gives a holy potion to the man to heal his wound. He thanks you, very surprised to be given something so valuable, and followed by that, the protagonist shout to everyone who has one wound that emits a purple glow, is that we're wounded with dark energy by let them come and collect a sacred passion, since the common ones will not work like that. Many people came to the protagonist to take the potion. This mentions that it was good to have packed many of them in the bag undersized. Devil surprises him that the protagonist delivers things like that valuable to what he tells you is not a monster, but in any case. Then he will make them pay with interest, but is more arrived wounded. A man brings a wounded child. The protagonist upon seeing it realizes, although he looks like a child, that one small is not a human, it is an ent. On the other hand, near the 5th village, we see one of the bandits and the magician. They are already collaborating that the magician provides the power to quickly wipe out the villages. While the bandits hand him over the humans, they agreed that the bandits will keep all the provisions and money from the villages, while the dark wizard will stay with people. And the dark wizard orders that they simply send to the people to the agreed place and go to the order. The bandit gets angry and moves forward, but we heard that the real plan of the magician is that once they finish, he will also use to the bandits, and with that, they should be enough people for the research. Now we move on to the int. Once he opens his eyes, he jumps from fright to death, see the protagonist, and start praying not to eat it. To what the protagonist tries to calm him down by saying that he won't eat it, but his excited face doesn't help, since he is excited to have found it, since he will be able to obtain his elixir. But that face scares the little one even more and stops. To calm him down, the protagonist gives him a bag with an exquisite smell for the creature. This contains bone powder, which creature eats it, which filled it with happiness of how delicious it was. Then the protagonist asks him why he was there, wounded and fainted, to what the creature asks him where the people were with him, to which the protagonist says that the people who brought it, they found him alone, and there was no one else. The little one couldn't believe it. The protagonist asks him if he knows what he is doing, happening in the forest, and if you tell her the truth may help him. But the little one does not knows whether to speak because his parents said not to trust humans, but suddenly the soldiers ring the bell since the bandits attack the protagonist. Hearing that, he gets up and says to the little one that if he doesn't speak, he won't be able to help him, so for now, only hide. The little one is still without know what to do, but wonder if the protagonist is different from other humans. So, he tearfully asks him if can really help him, and if he is different from other humans outside. Bandits launch an attack while the magician, using his dark magic, begins to summon the undead. The priestess, seeing the approaching bandits, walk towards them very confidently. The guards try to stop her because it is very dangerous, but the redhead says to leave her because even if he doesn't, it seems she is the most appropriate for this situation, is a crazy priest with the face of an angel, a warrior of the carnage that attracts death in the name. This is what a priest of the cult looks like, divine of the carnage. The girl launches towards them with a sadistic face and lands with great force. This begins to finish them all off, and seeing that the magician Dark casts some kind of magic on him. Dark, but it disappears from his eyes, and appearing behind him finishes him off. A little while later, a gentleman tells the redhead that every bandit was already captured, but the problem is that they don't know where they went to the people, since they only stayed with what they could sell and took them to people to dark wizards to someplace. The redhead gets angry because they must find the people as soon as possible. But at that moment comes the protagonist saying that there is still a way to find them, but they must hurry now that there is not much time. but returning a little bit into the past. The little ent told the protagonist that both he and humans had been captured, but he managed to escape. The protagonist doesn't understand why they would want to capture human entities, and suspect that maybe the dark wizards want to perform a great invocation or convert to all in undead. Although what most made him angry was that they messed with his elixirs, returning to the present. The protagonist tells the redhead that someone who escaped from the bandits told him where all the others are. Redhead asks the protagonist to stay since he already did a lot, but the protagonist, acting like a hero, he tells her that he will go now, who has seen everything that has been done by people. This softened even more the redhead's heart, and now believes that the protagonist is a good guy who cares for its people. Although, on the other hand, the protagonist knows that chaos is not the problem, since apparently the little ent told something important. On the other hand, inside an extinct volcano in the forest, we see this knight and a dark wizard. This one was apparently manufacturing some gem, but to finish it, he'd sacrifices from the 5th village. But the strange thing is that they hadn't arrived yet, but they decide not to give it importance. And the wizard mentions that once he finishes with the jewel, your lord will be one step closer of his objective. And we see that this knight is Sylvetta, whom this knight wants at all costs to make him the Archduke of the Grand Duchy of the Ahayas on another side. The protagonist now knows that words of the little ent who is behind it all is Mr. Kyming, who is one of the 3 dogs of Sylv the Dark Knight. But he must still check if it really is the Night Dark of whom the little ent spoke to him. To do so, he planned to bring the little one, but the redhead insisted on going, saying that it was a matter of his territory. But although the redhead has accompanied, wonders what it is, what she does here, and we see that. He talks about the priestess and believes that only she came because she was bored, even though he is surprised that she alone was able to finish off the bandits and the magician's dark, although it seems too much strange since that priestess is too obedient, so much so that even listens to what they say even if the devil doesn't share your opinion, since the girl is a crazy woman who finishes off the bandits without an order. But the protagonist remains convinced that it is strange since the priests of divine worship are crazy people who they know how to give themselves over to violence without meaning. Besides that, she is too powerful for a common priestess, since she not only finished off the wizards, priests, and bandits who attacked the villages, but she also killed monsters empowered by demonic energy with ease, which means that she should be a high priestess rank, or even higher. But that's not. It makes sense since the Saint of Blood Iron must be there. But he will keep a close eye on her anyways. Inside the extinct volcano where the Eden live, the protagonist and company were at how far away. The little one mentions that originally there was a tree in the center of the town that the bandits cut. The protagonist now understands it. Fairy tree is the source of energy for the spirits, so that they cut down the tree to cancel the powers of the N. Since in dark magic fairies are much more valuable as sacrifices that humans and wonders what they are up to and know, and humans suddenly come out of the cave, the protagonist can now confirm that. It's about him. The very angry redhead wants to launch the attack since he is the one who attacked his territory. But the protagonist tries to calm him down because even if Lance doesn't, they won't even be able to win altogether anymore. That there are also dark wizards everywhere sides. Also, he is sure that Klyman is at the level of a semi-master, which is definitely quite skillful. The protagonist was thinking about how they should act because if they attack, he is sure that he will not be able to win, but suddenly, Devil appears and mentions who has felt a disturbing aura since they entered the forest. And now he knows what he felt. The protagonist bothers him to stand in front of him since he doesn't let him see, but Devil gets angry and tells him that he's just trying to help, and that humans cannot feel him, but their great senses can detect it by instant T. Protagonist asks him what he detected, and when he told him, the protagonist was completely shocked. Now he understands everything. And it occurs to him an idea, this one. Asks the little one if knows everything in the forest. He confirms it, then asks the redhead if he is willing to do anything for his people, that he answers, that he would even give his life to. Hearing that, the protagonist laughs in a way macabre, and tells him that he won't be able to retract, what makes the redhead nervous, and then asks the priestess if she can also help them a few moments later, on the side to the left of the crater. The redhead was being chased by hundreds of monsters, although on the other hand, on the right side, hundreds of monsters were being chased by the priestess, making the monsters run towards a direction for fear. Now, we see the protagonist. He tells the little one that his plan is to use the monsters to awaken the true monster that will fight, since he is sure that this snake must be hungry after hundreds of years, without a meal and such, and as he believed, we see that our little snake was hungry. The little one was trembling with rage and shame, as if they were as strong as him. Protagonists could solve it themselves, but he tells him not to worry anymore because he plans to take revenge for what they did. Besides that, they also owe him something, but before leaving, he asks the little one not to forget his promise and coming back a little. In the past, we see that the little one promised the protagonist that if he helps him and saves his village, promises to give him all the tears that you want, since you know that his tears are very valuable to the humans, to which the protagonist accepts deal. But he asks you, instead of worry about his family, start to worry about himself. That leaves somewhat scared the boy. The protagonist summons Mephisto. He knows that this summoning, it is not perfect as it still needs work strength, but it is enough for now, and orders him to find a group of poisonous lizards in the lower parts of the forest and take them to the crater of the extinct volcano in the center of the forest. Mephisto listens to the order and leaves. This one sees that it is very useful to have a demon high-ranking person who follows orders and mentions that he needs to get stronger to be able to unlock full potential of Mephisto. Now, the protagonist warns the boy who must leave the boy. No understand what the protagonist explains to him that they must go to save the village and his family. Now we go with Kimming. We see he is worried that the bandits haven't yet arrived. Arrived with the Olden of the 5th village, suddenly sees waves in the water that should be calm, and followed by that he hears that something gets closer, and in the distance we see the redhead who is still running from the monsters attracting them. In addition, that is completely furious with the protagonist. Kimming, despite his surprise, is sure they can handle everyone, those monsters. But what he didn't expect, it looks like another horde of monsters. On the other side, he no longer understands what happens. The monsters advance to great speed. Kimming orders his men who stop the monsters for what the guards who were guarding the captured Olden. And ends were also, they march to try to stop the hordes. So the protagonist takes advantage of the fact that he is no longer, there is no one to infiltrate. Once these come to the prisoners. The little one is happy to see them, but he seems strange and asks them where the others are. They tell him that they are the last that remain, since they said they would use the others as sacrifices, and they took them. The little one realizes that he arrived too late. The protagonist explains that it is not his fault, and followed by that frees them by breaking the bars, and then he asks them if they know where they took the others, because if he goes there, he will be able to discover that they are planning. On the other side, the bandits were battling against many monsters. They were losing, and the giant snake that is found in the underground began to smell the smell of blood, so he woke up with force and quickly began to climb the surface. The protagonist can feel like that snake emerges. And while we see that this one comes out of the water, it mentions that it is about the king of the vipers, basilisk, and going back a little to the past, we see what the devil warned the protagonist about. That the nest is located here of the basilisk, since the density of poisonous energy that you can feel without doubt belongs to the basilisk, and mentions that possesses a poison so potent that a simple friction can inflict wounds. Criticism of a sword master, and believes that it should be in this place due to his weakened life force. Besides that, he also believes that the Forest of Death was also created by the poison that has exuded for hundreds of years. But all this seems to the protagonist strange, since normally the basilisks live in warm areas. How is it? But Devil answers him no, he knows. The only thing he does know is that he has been starving for hundreds of years, so she must be hungry.